Happening now, breaking news. The special counsel in the Biden classified documents probe defends his decision not to pursue charges and stands by his characterizations of the president's age and memory. I'll ask a key Democrat who questioned Robert Hur about his testimony and the attacks he faced from lawmakers in both parties. Also ahead, the Biden-Trump rematch is about to get even more intense as they're both expected to officially clinch their party's nominations within hours. We'll break down tonight's contest and the state of the very divisive presidential race. Plus, President Biden just wrapped up important talks with Poland's top leaders as the U.S. is unveiling a new $300 million weapons package for Ukraine, working around roadblocks in Congress. The U.S. Ambassador to Poland, Mark Brzezinski, will join us live to discuss this breaking story. Welcome to our viewers here in the United States and around the world. I'm Wolf Blitzer. You're in the Situation Room.
This is CNN Breaking News.
We begin with the breaking news on former special counsel Robert Hur in the hot seat up on Capitol Hill. Republicans and Democrats ripping apart his findings in the Biden classified documents investigation for very different reasons. CNN's chief legal affairs correspondent Paula Reed has more on this politically charged hearing.
Do you swear or affirm under
Former special counsel Robert Hur grilled by lawmakers from both sides of the aisle today about his investigation into President Biden's mishandling of classified documents.
Mr. Hur, why'd you do it? Why did Joe Biden, in your words, willfully retain and disclose classified materials? I mean, he knew the law. Been in office like 50 years.
You exonerated
a conviction.
I know that
did
the
not
term
exonerate him.
willful
That word does not appear in
retention
the
has a...
report, Congressman.
Mr. Hur, it's my time.
Biden's memory took center stage as Hur said in his report that he did not charge Biden because he believed a jury would see him as a sympathetic, well-meaning elderly man with a poor memory.
You find in your report that the elements of a federal criminal violation are met, but then you apply this senile cooperator theory, that because Joe Biden cooperated and the elevator doesn't go to the top floor, you don't think you can get a conviction.
You understood when you made that decision, didn't you, Mr. Hur, that you would ignite a political firestorm with that language, didn't you?
Congressman, politics played no part whatsoever in my investigative steps.
You cannot tell me you're so naive as to think your words would not have created a political firestorm. You understood that.
Hur told the committee he stood by the words in his report.
My assessment in the report about the relevance of the president's memory was necessary and accurate and fair.
Both sides using the issue to try to score political points.
I have a good memory and all that stuff, like a great memory.
Showing dueling videos featuring gaffes by Trump and Biden.
My memory is so bad I let you speak.
Hur was also pressed on the differences between Biden's case and that of former President Trump, those being that Biden returned the documents. He allowed for searches at various properties and even sat for a voluntary interview with the special counsel.
Did you find that President Biden engaged in a conspiracy to obstruct justice?
No.
Did you find that President Biden engaged in a scheme to conceal?
No.
And while Hur explained that he did not have enough evidence to prove the charges beyond a reasonable doubt, he made it clear that his report does not absolve the president.
Mr. Hur, did you completely exonerate President Biden?
That is not what my report does.
Hur also emphasized that he was making a legal conclusion about Biden's mental state, not a medical one.
Mr. Hur, based on your report, did you find that the president was senile?
I did not. That conclusion does not appear in my report.
A transcript of Biden's interview with Hur was released just a few hours before the hearing, causing Republicans to cry foul.
The timing is not coincidental.
And after the hearing wrapped, the White House responded, saying the hearing should put the classified documents investigation against Biden to rest.
The conclusion was simple, that there is no case here. The case is closed. It's time to move on.
Well, Republicans say they are moving on to try to obtain the audio of Biden's interview with former special counsel Hur. Now, Hur is now a private citizen. He left the Justice Department last week, and when asked if that recording should be released, he deferred to the Justice Department and the White House. Now, Wolf, they are unlikely to release that, but I think we're going to hear a lot about that recording over the next few months.
Paula Reed reporting for us. Paula, thank you very much. Let's break all of this down with our legal and political experts. And Laura Coates, you're our chief legal analyst. Let me start with you. Heard disputed claims from Democrats that effectively he exonerated President Biden by not formally charging him with any potential crime out there. Explain what's going on here, the difference between avoiding a specific charge and exoneration.
Well, exoneration means that I'm saying you've done nothing wrong. The prosecutorial discretion, what he's talking about, is that even with the evidence that might support some wrongdoing, I cannot meet my burden of proof. Therefore, I'm going to exercise my discretion to suggest that I shouldn't be prosecuting you. Every prosecutor knows it's not just the idea of thinking in your gut you can prove something. You actually have to prove it to a jury of people who are wanting you to meet your burden of proof. It means you got to get the right evidence in, the right witnesses to testify to that effect. There can't be so-called innocent explanations you can refute in some way down the line. And so he is recognizing the distinction between what you can prove and what you think you know. And a prosecutor worth his or her salt has to be able to go with what they can prove. And he's saying, I couldn't.
Beyond a reasonable doubt.
Beyond a reasonable doubt.
Which is not easy necessarily. Alice, did her, by saying he did not necessarily exonerate the president, did he give Republicans a potential political opening?
Yeah, he certainly did. And look, they're looking at this from the standpoint, well, if you're not completely exonerating him, then there's something there, right? And here's what Republicans are taking away from this. 3 things. One being, they look at this as a 2-tiered system of justice, right? They're looking at the underlying crime of willful retention of classified documents. The same crime Donald Trump is being prosecuted for because he has cognitive ability, and Joe Biden is not because he is an old man with a bad memory. Number 2, they're looking at this from the standpoint of Joe Biden lied to the American people. When he had that press conference after this first came out, he told the American people, I did not disclose classified information to my ghostwriter. He lied about that. And as Jim Jordan said today, he had 8 million reasons to do so because he has $8 million from this book that he's writing. But he did, as we heard from her today, he shared this information with his ghostwriter. And thirdly, they're taking away from this, this is just yet another case. The fact that they're going after Trump for willful retention of classified documents with the Mar-a-Lago case, he is yet another victim of the weaponization of the justice system. And this is the fact that Trump is facing charges. This is a weaponization of the DOJ. That is what Republicans will be taking away from this.
Ashley Etienne, I want you to listen to Adam Schiff. He did some really tough questioning of Robert Hur today, calling his characterizations of the president political. Listen to this exchange.
Sure.
You don't gratuitously add language that you know will be useful in a political campaign. You were not born yesterday. You understood exactly what you were doing. It was a choice.
What you are suggesting is that I shape, sanitize, omit portions of my reasoning and explanation to the Attorney General for political reasons.
No, I suggest that you not shape your report for political reasons, which is what you did.
That did not happen, Congressman. That did not happen.
What do you think?
No, I thought those were the most effective question lines from Adam Schiff and even Hank Johnson. Adam Schiff has a credibility as being a former prosecutor, and he made the point. You had a choice, but you chose to use language that you knew would cause a political firestorm. I've managed a lot of these hearings in the House, and here's sort of my major takeaway is this was another attempt by Republicans to weaponize the House to hurt Joe Biden, and it did not stick. It really amounted to 4 hours of an opportunity for Democrats to do what Adam Schiff did, to remind the public, hey, this guy is a Republican. He was a top lieutenant in Trump's DOJ, and therefore he's politically motivated. But it also gave them an opportunity to say that Donald Trump, A, was charged with a crime. He obstructed and then tried to cover it all up. Joe Biden, on the other hand, no crime, no foul, nothing here.
You know, it's really easy, and I say this as someone who's been, I've been a Hill staffer, a senior Justice Department official, and actually a witness before Congress myself, and it's easy to get lost in all the political noise that happened here. What this was, number one, Bob Hur, as the special counsel, was obligated under law to submit a report to the Attorney General, right? After submitting that report, in which he did not call for charges against the President of the United States, resigned from the Justice Department, which is incredibly common for special counsels. But John Durham did the same thing and testified here today. What is important to know is that charges are not being brought because he did not would not have been able to establish that these could have been charges that could have succeeded in front of a jury. That happens all the time in the art and science of prosecution. It doesn't matter if you think there was misconduct. It doesn't matter if anybody in their heart thinks someone's innocent, not guilty, exonerated, whatever else. It's what, and this was Laura's point earlier, what can you establish beyond a reasonable doubt in front of a jury? That is the important thing. That is the legal determination that was made. And all this mishigas, I don't know if you like that one, Wolf, but all this nonsense about whether someone's senile or whatever else simply does not matter in the eyes of the law, does not matter in the eyes of what's relevant to Congress.
I can't spell mishigas, but I can spell proof. And when you do so, you have to have an eye towards what the evidence actually shows. What was very clear to me from this entire testimony is that had Donald Trump behaved similarly to Joe Biden in terms of cooperating, providing the documents, sitting for the different depositions and interviews, not fighting when he had every opportunity to return the documents, he too would not have been charged. Now, of course, Hur did not want to speculate about the nature of Jack Smith's case, but every time he was asked down the line what Trump did compared to what Biden did, it was very clear the big distinction was the behavior of the person who is actually retaining the documents. And I thought really effectively, there was the attempt to suggest, well, hold on, have you created a new doctrine here by saying that, hold on, I can do whatever I want as long as I return the documents? He was not there to create a doctrine. He was there given the charge of, here is the evidence before me. What can I prove? And that's PROVE.
But here's the problem with that. A lot of what we've heard before from the president in this case, he's contradicted himself with regard to what he knew about the classified documents. We had documents in several different locations, and the president claims as though he was not aware that they were there. And that brings to mind the question for many people, and Republicans and others, if he doesn't know where these documents are and he cannot remember a lot of these facts that were the basis of this report, how does that make him good to be the president of the United States?
That's a political question, not a legal one, though. And the thing is, it's a political question, not a legal one. And I think this rush to compare Trump's conduct to Biden's is simply the wrong analysis. The fact is, if they thought they could convict Joe Biden beyond a reasonable doubt, they would have charged him with a crime. They can't, and they won't.
The ghostwriter was an issue, though.
Ashley, go ahead.
Yeah, no, I just want to say, Elliot's absolutely right, but this is the court of public opinion that we're talking about here. And I think there's one thing that's sort of that shouldn't be lost, because we're talking directly to the American people here, and that is the GOP, the Republicans' antics come at a cost. They had a member of the Judiciary Committee that decided, I'm going to retire early today. It could potentially come at a cost to their majority in the House. But in addition to that, it comes at a cost to the American people. There's no movement by that particular committee on bipartisan border legislation. No movement to keep the government open and fund the government. So that's what we have to remind people of. Whereas sometimes this is politics, it really comes at a cost to the American people.
All right, guys, everybody stand by. We're going to continue this conversation. Excellent Yiddish, by the way. Mishigas means nonsense.
Thank you, Mishpacha.
Yeah, we got the whole mishmucha here. Our Yiddish word of the day, Mishigas. All right, thanks to all of you, and be sure to join Laura later tonight for Laura Coates Live, 11 p.m. Eastern. We'll be watching. Just ahead, President Biden unveils new military aid to Ukraine. Will it reassure U.S. allies? Staring down Russian aggression right now, even as the package falls far short of what's desperately needed for Ukraine on the battlefield. Plus, more bad news for Boeing, what it could mean for your travel plans. Stay with us. You're in the Situation Room. Breaking news we're following. President Biden just wrapped up a crucial meeting over at the White House with the leaders of Poland as he unveils new U.S. military aid to Ukraine. The president warning the funding is not an excuse for congressional inaction. Listen.
The package includes munitions and rounds to help Ukraine hold the line against Russia's brutal attacks for the next couple of weeks. But it's not nearly enough what I'm announcing today. Congress must pass the bipartisan National Security Bill now, which includes urgent funding for Ukraine. We must act before it literally is too late.
CNN's Oren Lieberman is joining us from the Pentagon right now. He's got details. Oren, is this latest package that the president just announced essentially a stopgap measure?
Wolf, it can hardly even be called that. The White House made clear that this $300 million package could last a matter of weeks, perhaps as little as a couple of weeks. And you heard President Joe Biden say it there. 2 years into this war, this package could help out Ukraine for just a couple of weeks here. Here is what's in it. Some of the critical ammunition and weapons that Ukraine needs in its fight against Russia, including 155mm artillery ammunition. Ukraine able to fire much less than Russia in this case and having to ration some of that. Anti-aircraft missiles, which are needed to repel the Russian air assaults that have become pretty routine at this point, and Russia has used those to devastating effect, as well as more there. Even if it's only a little bit in a tiny fraction of what the U.S. has been able to provide in the past, Ukrainian President Volodymyr Zelensky showing his gratitude on Twitter or X, saying in a tweet, "Every round of ammunition saves the lives of Ukrainians who face daily attacks by Russian occupiers." Now, both the White House and the Pentagon made it clear that this is only a tiny fraction of what Ukraine needs, and what's needed here is that $90 billion supplemental that already got through the Senate and is now waiting in the House, where it does have bipartisan support in terms of what's in it. That first number there is the big one, at least for this conversation, $60 billion in aid for Ukraine that is desperately needed to make sure Ukraine doesn't cede any more territory to Russia. Wolf.
Oren Lieberman at the Pentagon, thank you. Joining us now, the United States Ambassador to Poland, Mark Brzezinski, just got out of that meeting at the White House with President Biden, as well as the Polish Prime Minister and the Polish President. Ambassador, thank you so much for joining us. This bigger Ukraine funding bill is still very much on the line right now. Take us inside today's talks at the White House, and you were there. Does Poland still feel the United States is a reliable partner?
Excellent question, Wolf. And what happened today was remarkable. A Polish president and a Polish prime minister, who are on opposite sides of the political spectrum, traveled to Washington to stand in solidarity with the American president, Joe Biden, to ask Congress to get this supplemental passed. Why? Because for the people of Poland, this is 1939. This is Central Europe being attacked by a vicious foreign attacker, and in this case, it's Russia against Ukraine. And Poland has been sticking its neck out in terms of sending weapons to Ukraine, to the Ukrainians, so they can defend themselves. And also, Poland has been welcoming literally millions of refugees who have poured in from Ukraine into Poland. Wolf, you were in Poland last spring. You see the number of refugees on the street, every one of which is welcomed into a Polish home or apartment as a product of national policy. But the Poles expect the Americans to continue to support the Ukrainians, and this is what the Polish president and the Polish prime minister wanted to hear from the American president, and they did. And they also wanted to hear America's firm and total commitment that Article 5, all for one, one for all, Article 5 of the NATO Pact is sacrosanct to the Americans, because the Poles are close. They have a history of being left by allies who promised to support them and then didn't. So they are anxious and uncertain.
They are very nervous indeed. I saw that when I was there. As you know, President Duda is calling on the NATO countries to boost their defense spending to at least 3% of their GDP. Is that a position President Biden would endorse?
President Biden at the Vilnius NATO summit last summer asked all NATO allies to exceed the 2% GDP spending on defense threshold. And we now have over 19 countries doing that, and it will be even more at the Washington summit this coming July. I don't think there's a sense that 3% now needs to be the new threshold. It is, I think, very important that the Poles have exceeded 4% of GDP in defense spending this year.
You've got to give the Poles a lot of credit for what they're doing to help the Ukrainians right now, and for its involvement in NATO, which is so critical. As you know, Donald Trump reportedly told the Hungarian strongman Viktor Orban he wouldn't give Ukraine another penny. How much alarm is there among European allies right now over a possible second Trump term?
The support of Ukraine is existential for the Poles and other Central Europeans, because they know that Putin of Russia, who is a KGB agent, who is the son of a KGB agent, has resolve and will not stop at Ukraine, and that if he defeats Ukraine, he will continue to go west. So for the Poles and other Central Europeans, this is existential. And again, it's 1939. except this time they feel they can do something about it, which is why the Polish president and prime minister are in Washington today. Of course, they came to the White House, but they also went up to Capitol Hill to meet with the House Speaker and the Senate Majority Leader and Minority Leader to make the case that this is about democracy versus dictatorship, and democracy must win.
It's a critical moment right now. Poland, of course, being right on the border with Ukraine. They're very nervous right now. Ambassador Brzezinski, thanks so much for joining us. Thanks for all your important work. We appreciate it.
Thank you, Wolf.
Coming up, a new insight into our top story. We're going to talk to a key member of the committee who questioned former special counsel Robert Hur. Congresswoman Pramila Jayapal is standing by live. We'll discuss when we come back. We're following breaking news on the congressional testimony by former special counsel Robert Hur. The White House arguing the case is now closed on Hur's investigation of President Biden's handling of classified documents. Let's bring in CNN's Brian Todd. Brian, whatever impact Hur's investigation may have, special counsel probes, as we all know, have left lasting marks on presidential history.
Many of them certainly have, Wolf. And while some investigations revealed tangled plots and sinister intent, other probes took on a life of their own based on how the president responded to them. Former special counsel Robert Hur's report is the latest in a long, contentious history of special counsel investigations into presidents and their top aides.
It represents an existential threat to both their reputation and the very existence of a political administration.
Since the Watergate era, every American president except one has faced a special counsel or independent counsel investigation into himself or his associates. The only exception, Barack Obama. Some of those probes fizzled out unceremoniously. Others shaped history.
I shall resign the presidency effective at noon tomorrow.
The most significant by far historically is Watergate, because after all, it resulted in the resignation of the only president who has ever been forced out of office, Richard Nixon.
Often these investigations are shaped by how the president has responded to them.
This was a hoax. This was a witch hunt.
President Donald Trump remained defiant through Robert Mueller's probe into Russian election interference and obstruction of justice. He was not prosecuted in the case. Richard Nixon's response to the Watergate investigation got him into more trouble when he covered up the break-in and was accused of obstructing justice. Bill Clinton ultimately faced impeachment over his lying about an affair with Monica Lewinsky during independent counsel Ken Starr's investigation of him.
I think the one lesson that's been learned over the years is that a president hides things at his own peril.
These investigations changed the course of presidencies, often for what they revealed. The Iran-Contra probe exposed a scheme by the Reagan administration to sell arms to Iran in exchange for hostages, with the money from the sales going to fund the Contra rebels in Nicaragua, in spite of a congressional law against it, which the president ultimately admitted to.
What began as a strategic opening to Iran deteriorated in its implementation into trading arms for hostages.
Several officials in the Reagan administration were prosecuted by independent counsel Lawrence Walsh, but not Reagan himself. Some of these probes have been outright unwieldy. Iran-Contra went on for years and was enormously expensive. Starr's investigation of Clinton expanded far beyond its original scope.
Whitewater was about a failed real estate deal in Arkansas that Bill and Hillary Clinton invested in, and ended up being about something completely unrelated, namely this romantic relationship between Bill Clinton and Monica Lewinsky.
While independent counsel or special counsel investigations have been damaging to past presidencies, they've also proven to be very unpredictable. The analysts we spoke to pointed out that even with the damage done to Presidents Ronald Reagan and Bill Clinton by the investigations into them, they both came out the other side being more popular in the polls. Wolf?
Interesting. Thanks for the history. Brian Todd reporting for us. Tonight, the White House and top Democrats are doubling down on calling President Biden innocent in the classified documents investigation. But former special counsel Robert Hur repeatedly pushed back on suggestions he exonerated the president, as in this tense exchange with Representative Pramila Jayapal.
This lengthy, expensive, and independent investigation resulted in a complete exoneration of President Joe Biden. For every document you discussed in your report,
I need to go back and make sure that I take note of a word that you used, exoneration. That is not a word
Hur,
that
I'm going to continue with my questions. I'm going to continue with you exonerated.
I did not exonerate him.
Willful
That word does not appear in
retention
the
has a
Democratic Congresswoman Pramila Jayapal is joining us now live. Congresswoman, thank you so much for joining us. By using that word, an explosive word, exonerate, did you actually wind up helping make Republicans point that President Biden did willfully retain classified documents?
Wolf, it's always good to be with you. And no, look, the common definition of exonerate is to absolve of any blame. And that is exactly what the 345-page report that Robert Hur did showed, that he had insufficient evidence to prosecute Joe Biden on any of the charges that he was investigating. And so he was not able to show that Joe Biden willfully retained classified documents and that he was, that he was guilty. So he was arguing it was a distinction without a difference, in my opinion. Maybe he was auditioning for to be Trump's attorney general. But you can't have a 345-page report that literally lays out charge after charge that you found insufficient evidence to be able to move forward with, and then say that somehow that person is not absolved of blame. And that is what the word exonerate means in common language. Now, obviously he was trying to use a legal term of exoneration, but you can look it up in Merriam-Webster dictionary. Exonerate is actually what happened in this report.
Hur said today that he, quote, did not sanitize, I'm quoting him now, he did not sanitize my explanation, nor did I disparage the president unfairly. How do you respond to that?
I think he was trying to have it all ways. He was trying to say that he was fair, but I understand that he, felt that he had to show his work. He kept saying that. But there are lots of ways to show your work without prejudicing the report and the person that is in the report. And that's why typically these documents are not made public. They are usually classified. But he knew, he's a very smart guy, he knew this one was going to be made public. And I think there are plenty of ways he could have characterized his belief that a jury would take a number of factors into consideration without prejudicing and drawing conclusions that I feel were very inappropriate about President Joe Biden.
On another important topic I want to question you on, very important. You've announced you won't support this latest effort to try to force a vote on an aid package for Ukraine and Taiwan because it also includes aid for Israel. Would you support this aid if it includes conditions on that military aid to Israel?
I think that is a discussion that is very worth having. And I would just say that this whole situation that we're in is because Republicans have refused to support aid to Ukraine. Speaker Johnson has the responsibility to put the Senate-passed bill on the floor. He has not done that because of the Ukraine aid. I will tell you, Wolf, that I would support a discharge petition today if it included only the Ukraine aid. If it included Taiwan aid, I would be fine. Obviously, if it included the humanitarian aid for Gaza and for other places, that would also be very good. But I think you would see a completely united Democratic caucus on the issue of aid for Ukraine. And, that is something that we should consider. But certainly, if we start looking at conditions, real conditions on aid to Israel, I would support defensive aid, Iron Dome aid for Israel today, because I think that's important to protect Israelis. But what I won't do is continue to support United States offensive military aid going in to kill people in Gaza when Benjamin Netanyahu has continued to say that he is completely opposed to a two-state solution. He has continued to encourage the expansion of settlements in the West Bank, and he's continued to block humanitarian aid to the Palestinians in Gaza, even though we are providing him with that offensive military aid. I think that is absolutely untenable.
Representative Pramila Jayapal, thanks so much for joining us.
Thank you.
And just ahead, President Biden and former President Trump now just hours away from likely clinching their party nominations. How the two candidates are ramping up their campaigns just ahead of their rematch. Tonight, President Biden and former President Trump are both likely to just clinch their party nominations a few hours from now, making a 2020 rematch all but official. Our senior political analyst, Ron Braunstein, is joining us right now. Ron, what do the campaigns need to do as they pivot to this general election?
Yeah, Wolf, can we take 1 second and just reflect on the magnitude of this moment? Both of them likely to become the nominees officially tonight, cross the threshold of delegates. First time since 1956, we've had a rematch 4 years later. That was Stevenson and Eisenhower. First time since 1912 with Teddy Roosevelt, we've had a former president on the ballot again. And the first time since 1892, we've had a rematch between a sitting president and the man he ousted out of the White House 4 years later. So certainly an historic standoff. And then when you add to that the magnitude of the gulf between them on all the big issues that we're facing, tax and spending, immigration, rights, abortion, democracy, with Trump promising just the other day that one of his first actions would be to pardon the January 6th, many of the January 6th rioters. Look, you've got Trump basically making a simple case. Things were better when I was president. I handed Biden a good economy, a secure border, crime under control, and he messed it up. That retrospective comparison, I think, is the heart of Trump's argument. We saw it on Super Tuesday night when he said if Joe Biden had just stayed on the beach the last 3 years, the country would be in better shape. Biden, as much as possible, wants to make this a prospective campaign about what each man would do over the next 4 years of return to power.
As you know, Ron, Georgia is one of the key battleground states voting today. Trump won there back in 2016, but lost in 2020. What are you looking for there?
Yeah, I think it's going to be interesting to see, because I think Democrats are the most pessimistic about Georgia of any of the 5 states that decided 2020 by flipping from Trump 16 to Biden 2020. That was Georgia, Arizona, Michigan, Pennsylvania, and Wisconsin. The Sun Belt breakthrough has been absolutely critical for Democrats, not only at the presidential level, but in the Senate, where they now have all of the Senate seats in Arizona and Georgia. But holding those breakthroughs, that kind of beachhead that Biden established in 20 may be more difficult for them than maintaining their strength in the former blue wall states of Michigan, Pennsylvania, and Wisconsin. So I think people will be looking at turnout tonight in Georgia, but whatever happens tonight, Georgia probably looks like the shakiest of the states that Biden flipped from 16 to 20.
A key battleground state indeed. Ron Braunstein, thank you very, very much. Coming up, bad headlines mounting for Boeing right now, with the heads of major U.S. airlines saying today the company's problems could impact your upcoming travel. All right, just into CNN, the National Transportation Safety Board has announced a rare public hearing on one of the many recent safety issues involving Boeing jets, the door plug blowout on an Alaska Airlines 737 MAX. Boeing officials could potentially be subpoenaed to testify. This comes as we're learning more about another Boeing jet that suddenly dropped in mid-flight. Here's CNN aviation correspondent Pete Muntean.
New images show the aftermath of Monday's mysterious in-flight jolt on a Chilean Boeing 787. LATAM Airlines says a technical event caused a strong movement on board, injuring 50 passengers who peppered the pilots with questions.
I immediately engaged with him and said, what was that? And he openly admitted, he said, I lost control of the plane. My gauges just kind of went blank on me. And that's when the plane just took a dive.
Boeing says it is standing by to help investigate the incident, the latest involving a Boeing plane, following the Alaska Airlines door plug blowout in January, a wheel falling off a United flight last week, and hydraulic fluid trailing from another United flight during takeoff from Sydney this week.
People are pretty wary of Boeing right now, and when anything happens on a Boeing, people want to know.
Though there is no clear link between each incident, Boeing remains under the microscope of federal investigators. The Federal Aviation Administration now says it has completed its review of the 737 production line, with the New York Times reporting Boeing failed 33 of 89 quality control audits.
It wasn't just paperwork issues. Sometimes it's order that work is done. Sometimes it's tool management. It sounds kind of pedestrian, but it's really important in a factory that you have a way of tracking your tools effectively so that you have the right tool and that you know you didn't leave it behind.
FAA scrutiny follows anger from the National Transportation Safety Board, which blasted Boeing on Capitol Hill last week for failing to provide records that detailed the omission of key bolts from the Alaska Airlines plane. Boeing says those records do not exist.
We don't have the records. We don't have the names of the 25 people that is in charge of doing that work in that facility. It's absurd that 2 months later, we don't have that.
Well, if you mentioned the National Transportation Safety Board just announced that rare public hearing on the Alaska Airlines door plug incident. These things have typically been reserved for things like the East Palestine rail disaster and the Miracle on the Hudson. But this is the first such hearing to focus on an incident involving a 737 MAX. Boeing has not indicated how it will respond, but it is answering to the findings from the FAA's audit. A new Boeing memo instructs workers to precisely follow every step when building airplanes. The pressure is on from the top all the way down to the factory floor at Boeing. Wolf.
Clearly that pressure is needed. Pete Muntean, thank you very, very much. Coming up, we'll have a live report from Uvalde, Texas. The police chief abruptly resigning as the city council preps to reject a report clearing officers of wrongdoing in the 2022 mass shooting. We're following surprising developments out of Uvalde, Texas tonight. The police chief there abruptly resigning after a report commissioned by the city cleared local officers of wrongdoing during the 2022 elementary school massacre. CNN's Shimon Prokopez is in Uvalde for us. Shimon, give us the context behind this resignation.
Well, it certainly came as a surprise, Wolf. No one was expecting this today. This is the police department, the city's police department's chief. He actually was not here on the day of the horrific shooting. He was on vacation at the time, but this was still his police department. And so when this report came out last week, essentially clearing these officers, he took a lot of heat from the family members. He was actually supposed to be here today to answer some questions, to possibly make a presentation to the city council where I am here tonight. He's not here. His deputy chief is here. It's unclear if he will speak, but certainly the families have a lot of questions for him. You know, this is all happening as really this community is just reeling from what happened here last week. I got a chance to speak with the former mayor of Uvalde who wanted this investigation when he was mayor, talking about just how horrific to hear those words from that investigator and what it did to this community. Take a listen.
Well, it ripped the wound wide open again. Instead of a tear, it's torn, it's gushed wide open now. I mean, you know, we're right back that we've got to reestablish trust again. We've got to reestablish a deal there, and I mean, I believe this council will. But I think there's a question of mistrust still with this report.
How painful is that?
Pretty painful.
And so, Wolf, now that's a big question. What will they do? Will the city council work to reject this report? That is something the families want, so we stand by and we see what happens here, Wolf.
Shimon Prokopez, thank you very much. Finally tonight, some very sad news. The IDF announcing the death of dual U.S.-Israeli citizen Itai Chen. Itai was previously believed to be alive and being held hostage in Gaza, but Israel now says he was killed during the October 7th attack. Earlier this year, Itai's parents joined me in the Situation Room to talk about the agonizing wait for news about their son.
We had last contacts with him October 7th in the morning, where he said that the place that he was at was under attack. After a few hours, when we were unable to reach him, we understood it was a bit different. We started seeing the news videos, coming out. And he was initially identified as missing in action, meaning nobody knew where he was.
He should be home. My message is, it's enough. We suffered enough. All the families, all the 136 hostages, the families suffer enough, and we cannot handle this situation anymore.
We want to send our deepest condolences to Itai's loved ones. May he rest in peace, and may his memory be a blessing. Thanks very much for watching. I'm Wolf Blitzer in the Situation Room. Aaron Burnett out front starts right now.
A special edition of Out Front next. The breaking news, President Biden about to officially clinch the nomination. That is expected this hour as polls close in Georgia, the state that will put him over the top. Plus the showdown over the powerful union vote. Biden meeting behind closed doors with the Teamsters today. And one of the executives in that room makes a bold prediction. He's our guest. And RFK Jr. narrowing down his list for VP. One's an NFL star and the other, former professional wrestler. In an election where Kennedy could end up determining who wins the White House. Let's go out front. America votes. And a good evening to all and welcome to this special edition of Out Front tonight. I'm Erin Burnett, and this evening we begin with the breaking news because the first polls are closing right now on an historic day of primaries. We are standing by for the first results to come in from Georgia, where the polls are closing. This will most likely, be the moment that Biden formally clinches the Democratic nomination and the night that Trump cements the Republican nomination, which will set up the first presidential take-two rematch in nearly 70 years. And Georgia, as crucial as it is, with the polls closing this moment, is one of 4 states holding contests today. Both candidates have so much riding on this state because Trump, of course, lost Georgia infamously by only 11,779 votes in 2020. He claims if he wins it this time around, he will win it all. And the reality is that Georgia is seen as must win in the general election. And tonight's results will tell us a whole lot about enthusiasm, the passion of the voters, what they care about. And our team of reporters is standing by to kick us off as these polls close in Georgia. Kristen Holmes covering the Trump campaign. I want to begin, though, with MJ Lee, who is at the White House with President Biden. And MJ, obviously, this could be the moment where he clinches the nomination with these Georgia results coming out momentarily. What are you hearing from the Biden team tonight about his next move?
Yeah, Erin, when President Biden officially crosses that delegate's threshold, of course it is going to be a symbolically significant moment for the campaign. And the campaign is hoping that it will be one more thing that helps voters who so far have been tuned out of the election see that 2024 is really going to be a race between President Biden and former President Donald Trump. Of course, this evening comes just hours after that Robert Hur testimony. And despite Hur saying that he was not exonerating President Biden, you saw the White House all day today saying case closed, basically that the president is innocent. And you can definitely sense that there is a sense of relief both here at the White House and with the campaign that this is now in the rearview mirror. As one campaign official put it, they said this is definitely a turn the page moment between this evening and the testimony being over. They said the transcript is out, the hearing is over, and we can now move on. We certainly expect that tonight, whenever the president officially clinches the Democratic nomination for president, we are going to hear from him in some fashion. Erin.
All right. Well, of course, we're going to await that and await here when we are able to make a call formally on the state of Georgia, where the polls have closed just 3 minutes ago. MJ, thank you. So let's go to Kristen Holmes, talking to her sources inside the Trump campaign. And Kristen, obviously a crucial night for Trump as well, where he anticipates clinching the nomination formally on the Republican side. What's going behind the scenes?
Yeah, Erin, I mean, all of this now is looking forward to the November general election. Yes, tonight is a big night. Donald Trump expected to clinch the nomination, but he's not even doing anything to celebrate. He's at Mar-a-Lago. He's not having a party. We're not expected to hear from him, and that's because they've really been acting as though he is the nominee for the last several weeks. Now, what does this actually look like in terms of moving forward? It is building out ground game, building out strategy, particularly in those key battleground states. I'm told there's about 7 states that they view as tier 1 battleground states. We're talking about Pennsylvania, Michigan, Georgia, Arizona, Nevada, among some of them. What does this look like? It looks like them trying to put their heads together, build this out, but it also looks like tapping into the RNC infrastructure that already exists. We saw essentially a Trump takeover of the RNC this week. Ronna McDaniel, who had been at odds with Donald Trump, stepping down. Instead, Michael Whatley, who was Trump's hand-picked candidate, is elected chair, and his daughter-in-law, Lara Trump, takes over as co-chair. This is a full-on Trump takeover. According to one source, there was a bloodbath at the RNC as staff members were getting slashed. I've spoken to a number of people who work over there who are worried about their jobs. They don't know what's going to happen next. There is a full loyalist infiltration at the RNC, which is common when you have a nominee actually win the nomination, and they had declared him the presumptive nominee last week. Now, the other part of this, as you're talking to people freaking out, they have said that they are hoping Michael Whatley stands up to some of this Trump takeover, suggested takeover, because it will be up to the new chairman to determine some of this stuff. However, again, remember, this is a Trump hand-picked candidate who's in that position. Aaron?
All right, Kristen, thank you very much. So let's go to David Chalian, our political director. So, David, you know, it's a significant night, historic in that setting up this rematch, first in nearly 70 years. Biden and Trump both poised to capture enough delegates in these next minutes and hours to secure their party's nomination. So let's start with Biden as we await the call in Georgia, where the polls just closed, as I said, about 5 minutes ago, that could officially put him over the top, that he has the nomination. Where does he currently stand in the delegate count?
So if you look in the upper right-hand corner there, 1,968 delegates is what is needed to secure the Democratic nomination. Joe Biden has 1,868 delegates in his column to date, so he is 100 shy of where he needs to be, Aaron. There are 108 delegates at stake on the Democratic side in Georgia, so as we await for that vote to come in from Georgia, we'll be able to see if he's able to put it away with that early state closing tonight and get over the hurdle there. You see 20 delegates uncommitted has, and that's largely due to that protest vote that we saw in Michigan and Minnesota and Hawaii. And then Joe Biden did lose American Samoa. Take a look here. If you look at the delegates won to date by percentages, Aaron, 98.8% of the delegates are Joe Biden's in this race. He just did not have much competition. Dean Phillips, Marianne Williamson never really materialized. You see he's dominant there. And if you look at what's needed to win, as I said, he's only 100 away. 4.9% of the remaining delegates is what he needs, and perhaps he'll get that out of Georgia tonight.
Right, right. And obviously, you know, Mr. Palmer that you see there, the international man of mystery, right? He's the only one that even got any delegates, not Williamson or Dean Phillips. Okay, but what about Trump on the other side? Obviously, you don't have a number like 98.6 or whatever you just said for Biden. But where is he in terms of securing enough delegates on the Republican side tonight?
He's close too, Aaron, and as you said, he's likely to clinch it tonight. 1,215 is the magic number needed on the Republican side. You see Donald Trump is at 1,089 right now, obviously dominant when you look at Haley only at 91. DeSantis and Ramaswamy picked up some delegates before they dropped out. Look at where it is by percentage. If you can see that 91.4% of the delegates to date have gone to Donald Trump compared to only 7.6% for Nikki Haley. So what does Donald Trump need to get to 1,215? He needs 10.2% of the remaining delegates at stake. And clearly, with the delegates at stake tonight in Georgia, in Washington State, in Hawaii, you'll be able to see that Donald Trump is likely to get over that hurdle and secure the nomination tonight as well.
All right, David Chalian, we're going to be checking back in with you when we are able to make some of these first calls. It's significant to say, by the way, in a contested, heavily contested by Nikki Haley, right, and all the way through, still Trump has 91.4% of the delegates thus far. And we will see when we can make these first calls. Let's go to John King at the Magic Wall. And John, you know, it's interesting. Trump has made it very clear if he wins Georgia, he thinks he wins the election, like that he's made it that black and white in comments. But how closely is Biden's campaign watching Georgia tonight with that unforgettable 10,779 vote margin last time?
Right, I'll go back and show you that in a minute, but they're watching for this because of the point David just made. These are our first votes actually coming in the primary right now. Because of what we expect to happen by the end of the night, a lot of people are already talking about November, right? And we'll get there. But the Biden campaign is first looking at this, and right now they're getting 95% of the vote, which means they're going to get the bulk of those delegates, which means, if I just shift over here for a second, here's where the president is tonight, and as David just noted, by the end of the night, maybe even within an hour or two, when we allocate the Georgia delegates, the President of the United States is going to clinch renomination. And that's a big deal, right? He didn't have serious primary opposition, so how big of a deal? We leave that to debate. But it does allow you to focus your time, your energy, your resources on the general election. Now, you mentioned what Trump said about this. Well, this is 2024. You come back to 2016, 2020. I'm sorry about that. That caused a lot of bad flashbacks for Democrats there, didn't I? We'll come right here to Georgia 2020, 11,779 votes, right? So the former President of the United States says, if I can win this, then I win the election. Well, not so fast. If we come back and look at the race to 270, we'll come back. Let's look at where we ended the last campaign and come up here. This is where we ended the last campaign. If you make the adjustments after the census for the electoral colleges, you come back here. Let's just say, for the sake of argument, Trump took that away, right? No, it doesn't want to work for me here. Hang on. Let me do it here.
Someone hack into your wall?
No, it's just having a little fun. Let's say every now and then it has fun. So there you go. Let's say Trump got that. Let's say Biden kept this, and Biden kept this, and Biden kept this, and Biden kept this, and Biden kept that.
John,
that.
hold
Guess
on
what?
1 second.
That's not enough.
Hold on 1 second. I'm going to come right back to you, but I do just want everyone to know we do now have a CNN projection. And we can now project at CNN that President Biden has enough delegates to win the Democratic nomination for the 2024 presidential election. And as we've been saying, this is a major and historic moment in the race. Biden now pushing ahead with his re-election bid, and the state that got him over the edge, the state that got him over the top, we'll see in hindsight how significant that is the state of Georgia, where polls just closed at the top of the hour. Took us just under 11 minutes here to make this formal call, and we are now projecting Georgia is a win for Biden. We'll get back to John King in a moment. David Chalian, first, though, can you tell us what this means for the delegate count?
Yeah, Aaron, as you can see here, Joe Biden at 1,972 is clear above that benchmark of the 1,968 he needed to secure the nomination. Joe Biden, your presumptive Democratic nominee, it just awaits the formality of the delegates in Chicago this summer at the Democratic Convention to make it official. But Joe Biden has secured enough delegates to seek the re-election that he hopes will be successful come November. You see here, we've been able to allocate 104 of the 108 delegates at stake in Georgia to Joe Biden with the vote that has already come in. He's winning 95% of the vote that's in so far. We're able to put 104 of those 108 delegates. 4 delegates remain unallocated as we will await more vote to come in. But that was clearly, when he was only 100 away, enough to get him over the hurdle. And as you noted, I have little doubt that his campaign will make fast business of touting that it is Georgia, a major battleground state they want to campaign in, to do the job to get him over the hump.
Exactly the point. And obviously, we'll see as those other 4 delegates are allocated and as we get more information, as the numbers come in on turnout and enthusiasm, what we can interpret from that with David as this hour continues. John King, though, they are going to make hay of, it was Georgia. It was Georgia that put President Biden over the top for the nomination. But when you look at how crucial Georgia is it this must-win for him?
Is it a must-win for either candidate? No, but is it a nice chunk, especially if we believe what happened in 2020, can it continue, right? What happened in 2020, let's come back to the map and look at the presidential race here and watch this play out. So what happened in 2020? Number one, Biden reestablished the blue wall. Hillary Clinton lost Pennsylvania, Michigan, and Wisconsin. Joe Biden got them back, right? The blue-collar campaign, Trump re-election campaign. That's how Trump became president. He flipped the old blue wall, those 3 Democratic states. But then Biden added this and added this, which hadn't voted Democrat for president in quite some time. So these emerging, the Sun Belt states, the population is growing. They're becoming more suburban. In Georgia, you have a Democratic base, the African-American vote. Joe Biden was able to put together the combination of the existing Democratic base with the shift of the suburbs toward the Democrats and put together what was a very impressive Electoral College win and a 7 million vote win in the popular vote right there. Now, most of those votes came from California. So if you're looking at the map this time, there's just a brand new CBS YouGov poll out of Georgia tonight that essentially shows a dead heat. Donald Trump slightly ahead, but no clear leader when you look at the margin of error. And in that poll, Aaron, you see strengths and weaknesses for both candidates. A weakness for Biden is the same thing we saw in the National New York Times Siena College poll last week. People doubting, are his economic policies good for me? Trump scores a little bit better. People think if Trump were president, I'd do a little bit better economically. But there's also a pretty sizable chunk of voters in that new poll that says if Donald Trump is convicted, he wouldn't be qualified to be president, which is why, as we have these conversations about November in March, it's inevitable. Both candidates are going to clinch, most likely to clinch anyway tonight. We start having these conversations. Remember, we don't know who Trump's going to pick as his vice president. We don't know if there's going to be a trial before November. We don't know which third-party candidates are going to be on the ballot in which state. So right now, you have a very competitive race, just like last time, between these 2 candidates who both have considerable strengths, both have considerable weaknesses, and there are so many unknowns. We can game it out, but as we do so, we better be very, very careful because there are so many variables and hypotheticals that we're not going to answer, in some cases, for weeks and months.
All right, John, thank you. And as John concludes, we do have a CNN projection. And we can now project that former President Donald Trump will win the Georgia Republican primary. That means he adds more delegates to his account, as we do expect him to clinch the Republican nomination tonight. There are 4 states, of course, voting, but we now can project that Donald Trump has won the state of Georgia. David Chalian, what can you tell us about what this means for his delegate map?
Well, Donald Trump is inching closer to that magic number in the upper right-hand corner there. 1,215 is what he needs. We've been to allocate some delegates from Georgia tonight to him. He now has 1,144 delegates compared to Haley's 91. So if I do math in my head on live television, which is never a really good idea, I would say that is, 71 delegates away from the, did I do that math right? From the nomination. So we've got more to do here.
I get 71 too.
Oh, good. Thank you for confirming, Aaron. But we've got more to do here with more contests. Mississippi will close in the next hour, and Donald Trump will try to make ground all night long through these contests. But clearly, he is knocking on the door of securing this Republican nomination. And as John was just saying, here we are in the second Tuesday of March, and this November contest is solidifying to what we know it to be, this Trump-Biden rematch.
And David, one follow here. Obviously, this is this contest tonight in all of these states is something where people know the outcome in advance, in a sense. So it's hard to read too much, perhaps, into turnout when it comes to enthusiasm or anything like that. But are you able to see anything early yet, just to give us an indication on that front?
You know, I don't know that we're able to see it yet, Aaron, but I think it's a good question to watch for. You are right. Nikki Haley has dropped out of this race. We're not going to get a ton of valuable information about the way the vote comes in. But what John was just describing about the coalition that Biden put together, the base Democrats, along with those emerging trending suburbs in more Democratic favor in the Trump years, looking at how the suburbs vote. Because remember, Nikki Haley's not actively campaigning, but her name is on the ballot. Do we see, as the vote comes in some of those critical areas, this remaining protest vote against Trump, or does that just completely drift away now that it's a one-man show on the Republican side?
All right, David Chalian will be checking back in with you, and everyone is here with me. What do you think about the point David just made, that as we look at these results, obviously you've got Trump and Biden each winning in Georgia. Could be hugely symbolic in hindsight. We don't know. The state of Georgia putting Biden over the top. The point about the suburbs and whether there still is that protest vote, even though Nikki Haley, of course, is not in the race.
Yeah, Georgia's got something for everybody here, depending on what you're looking at. The suburbs have not been kind to Trump over the course of his time, and you see some former Republican voters flowing to the Democrats, but there are also a lot of African-American voters in Georgia, and some of the polling right now suggests that Trump's doing much better with African-Americans, especially African-American men. That could come to play in Georgia. Also, a lot of rural areas in Georgia, and one of the ways Donald Trump won in 2016 is driving up the vote in the rural areas. So Georgia, not only the fact that it was close, but for all these demographic reasons, and this is a state we're going to be talking about, I assume, every night out here.
I would imagine so.
Yeah, no, I do think the fact that we are really having this conversation about Georgia says a lot about the change in dynamic. I think you're absolutely right that, states like New York have lost population largely to states like North Carolina, Texas, and Georgia. So the reshaping of both the cities and those suburban communities by a lot of African-American voters and other households that have gone down to the South are really reshaping that Democratic coalition. I think when you layer on top of that some of the changes that have taken place with respect to the Dobbs decision, how does the Dobbs decision and a mobilization of so many women, particularly suburban white women, how is that reshaping that Democratic coalition? I don't agree that a lot of more African Americans will vote for Trump this time. I'm hopeful that a lot don't, for a lot of reasons we could get into another time. But I do think that core Democratic coalition is being reshaped as we watch it unfold.
All right, everyone stay with me because our coverage is going to continue here. Former President Trump has won the Georgia primary on the Republican side, on track to win the GOP nomination tonight. Biden now has clinched the Democratic nomination because of the state of Georgia, as he fights Trump for the support of one of the most powerful unions in the world, now trying to go for the key endorsement of the Teamsters. Had a meeting with them behind closed doors, and an executive in that room is out front. Says he is sure he knows who's getting that coveted endorsement. Plus, RFK Jr., Cornel West, and Jill Stein are all trying to run in major battleground states and may succeed. So, will they be the ones determining who wins the White House? And Special Counsel Robert Hur grilled on Capitol Hill today over his report on Biden's handling of classified documents, and he managed to disappoint Democrats and Republicans.
You knew that would play into the Republicans' narrative that the president is unfit for office because he's senile.
Congressman, I reject the suggestion.
And the breaking news on this special edition of Out Front, President Biden moments ago officially clinching the Democratic nomination for president. He had, of course, that win in the Georgia primary where polls just closed moments ago. Georgia is crucial for both candidates in the general election. And Trump, we also can report, won his Georgia primary just moments ago, which puts him solidly on track to win the GOP nomination tonight. Now, we are awaiting the results of 3 more states on this second of what would be the Super Tuesdays. And we're going to be updating you as soon as that information starts to come in. John King joins me now. And John, what are you seeing coming in right now?
So, Aaron, as you watch the results come in one way, people at home are probably saying no drama, right? Because we know Joe Biden has already clinched the Democratic nomination because we have projected he will win Georgia, and you see why. He's getting more than 95% of the vote in early results. So we expect by the end of the night, by the time Hawaii comes in anyway, that Donald Trump will clinch the Republican nomination. Well, so where's the drama? What are you looking for? Well, as you noted, this is a key battleground state. Joe Biden won it by 11,000 votes and some change 4 years ago. And so if you're looking at this as a battleground in November, what do you look for on primary night? Number one, this is a chance to test new technology or ways to contact voters. You're not going to have a huge high turnout primary because you know Joe Biden's going to win. But were you in contact with somebody and then did they show up? Did you try some new technology and did they show up? What I'll be watching, we don't have the votes yet, is this circle right around Atlanta. Fulton County and the suburban loop around it. That's what settled this election. If you go back to 2020 and the presidential election, right here. Atlanta and the suburbs gave then candidate, now President Joe Biden, that margin. So you're looking for that. And if you're Donald Trump, you look in the Republican primary. David Chalian teed this up a bit earlier. So far, everything coming in is coming in with Trump winning. But look, Nikki Haley at the moment is getting about 16% of the vote. As we get, again, into Fulton County and the suburbs around it, Cobb, Gwinnett, DeKalb, and the others, you're trying to see what is Haley's number there, because that's where the state will be decided. Does Donald Trump continue to have trouble in the suburbs? This is where, look, let's not overstate it. Donald Trump is overwhelmingly marching to the Republican nomination. But as he shows the strength in doing that, the resilience in doing that, we are seeing weaknesses for Trump, and they tend to be in the suburbs. So as we check in later in the night, that's where we're looking right there. Donald Trump's going to win. He can celebrate. But then both campaigns, you learn the lessons. You have 8 months to try to solve your problems, and this will teach us some of them, teach us about some of them tonight.
All right, John King, we'll be checking back in with John in just a moment, obviously doing that circle around Atlanta. Olivia, what do you make of, and we're waiting for that Fulton County as we're getting more feeding in, but even with the numbers that are in, and as you could see from John's map, a lot of those are rural, but even among what he's got so far, 16% of the votes are still for Haley. Now, she's not on the ballot. I mean, she's not running. She has got now. Does that mean anything? Do those people end up getting in line if they bothered to vote in a Republican primary in Georgia?
Well, I think they will. I think we'll see them come out in November, hopefully, and hopefully they'll be on the right side of history and stand against Trump. I think that's a protest vote at this point, saying we're not going to support Trump. I think these are either the never Trumpers or moderate center-right Republicans who are really unhappy about what's happening to the Republican Party.
So these are people who don't get in line. The nature of the fact that they're choosing to do this tonight.
Right. They're going out of their way and saying, no, I'm going to stay in this fight and I'm going to continue to stand against Trump.
You started your career as a reporter in Georgia, and you see that circle. Obviously, the state has changed so much over the years. Now it's become this purple.
But that's okay.
Nah, I'm not going to judge. Could be die.
It could be die.
But look at that circle that John King draws around Atlanta and Fulton County. What are you looking for?
So, you know, if you just even go back, and I hate to say it, 25 plus years, you had Newt Gingrich, who was the Speaker of the House. He was going to run for president. Georgia was ground zero, really, for the Republican Party, and it was really going to take over. I mean, the South is still very much Republican. I don't want to give anyone any other assumption, but if you look, it's starting to break a little bit, and that's because we're seeing trends. We're seeing, different immigration trends that are happening, not only from folks, coming in from other countries, but quite frankly, people from the North moving down to the South. That's exactly what happened to Atlanta. UPS was based in Connecticut. They moved down there 25 years ago. The Olympics show up, and now you got Georgia, which is not really, it's not this 1976 Smokey and the Bandit kind of state. It just isn't. Yep. It's a cosmopolitan state now with rural enclaves.
No, but that's why I think your point about the Haley vote is so critical, because what that suggests to me is something that I have trouble wrestling with as a strategist. If you're Donald Trump, you got to build your base. You don't shrink it. And when I think about, your comment about immigration, I listened to him, Donald Trump, in Georgia over the weekend, make some really reckless and dangerous comments about immigrants. Now, I understand a young woman was killed attended the University of Georgia, allegedly by a migrant. But Donald Trump has made some really, really harsh and disturbing comments about immigrants. And I'm saying to myself, who are you trying to get on your side when you make those kinds of comments? Maybe that works with your core base, but how are you actually expanding that? Because what Joe Biden is going to turn around and do is go after a lot of those Nikki Haley voters and others to say, look, there's opportunity for you on our side.
And just to make the point, and obviously we don't know turnout, right? So I can't say definitively mathematically, but I can say generally mathematically, he can't afford to lose 16% of the GOP primary vote in the general.
Yes. However, I'll take the other side of this argument, which is that a lot of these people, I think, are lost to Donald Trump. I think they are protest voters. I don't think many of them voted for him in 2020, and maybe they didn't even vote for him in 2016. What they are planning to do is to remake the Republican Party and say, okay, what's a better use of our time and money? To spin our wheels on people who've never liked Donald Trump, or go into Joe Biden's voters, working class, multiracial, working class voters.
Well, that's where you get to African-American men are the points that you're making.
Hispanics, this working class, non-college educated, multiracial coalition. So they're flowing in, the suburban, college-educated flowing out. Now, the question is, which side does the algebra support? And that's why we're going to run the election. But I think for Trump, it's a far more efficient use of his time to try to steal those working class people that we would have called Democrats for most of our career, but now don't like what the Democrats are doing culturally, so they're coming towards the Republican Party, then to try to go back and go on some reconciliation tour with Nikki Haley's voters, which is not going to work.
The governor of Georgia, Brian Kemp, reiterated his support for Trump today, which, by the way, is interesting because Trump backed a primary challenger against Kemp. Kemp stood up for the accurate and many times counted vote in Georgia going for Biden. Trump despised him. And now suddenly it seems to be kumbaya. Let me just play what Governor Kemp said today.
You know, I voted Friday in the Republican presidential preference primary, and I've said for a long time now I'd support the nominee.
Now, he didn't directly say he voted for Trump. Okay, and that may be an admission of
between the lines.
Who knows? It's unclear. But he did say for a long time now I'd support the nominee. What does that say to you? Now, that's not a Nikki Haley protest vote sort of person. I understand that, but that is getting in line.
It is, and it's incredibly frustrating to watch, especially coming from someone who showed incredible integrity during the 2020 election. He didn't bend to Trump. He endured tremendous pressure, even though Trump pressured him. I think also, just recently, I think earlier this year, he said no one should be above the law. Trump should not be above the law. He said no, Trump should not have presidential immunity. He's made all of these significant statements on the right side of history. But yet to turn around and endorse him just because he is a Republican nominee is certainly falling back in line with the party. But I would say to that, all you're doing is enabling the dangerous individual that you took a stand against. And so what is it? Is it a fleeting moment of integrity, a fleeting moment of doing the right thing? And my problem with that is how we got here as a Republican Party when you continue to give this man a pass. I want all of these people to stand up against Trump and change the direction of the Republican Party. And I know that that is actually unlikely to be the case now when you see people like that fall back in line. You saw it with, Mitch McConnell recently.
Yep.
Turned around. I mean, you see it now with all these people. So I think that is what shows what the future is going to be for the.
All right, well, we watch these results coming in. Nikki Haley right now is still 16.4% of the vote in Georgia. And obviously, as you can see, a very small percentage of the vote is in. But we're watching those numbers very carefully over these next moments to see what we can read in the tea leaves. And as Biden and Trump are locking up this crucial win in Georgia, looking ahead to other states, they are fighting over a major endorsement tonight here in the general election. Today, Biden met behind closed doors with the Teamsters Union, which, of course, is one of the biggest unions in the country. And our guest was in that meeting. Out front now, John Palmer. He's the vice president at large of the International Brotherhood of Teamsters. And John, thanks for being with us. So based on what you heard in the meeting today, will Biden get the Teamsters endorsement?
I'm pretty certain he will, based on the tone and tenure of everybody in the room. And, I wasn't present for the last interview with the former president, but everyone sort of made a big difference between a candidate of grievance and a candidate of action and doing things for the labor movement and working men and women across the country.
So you mentioned that you feel confident that he may get this endorsement. But, when you look at 2020, your union, the Teamsters, didn't give an endorsement until about 11 weeks before the election. And exit polling at the time shows nearly 3/4 of voters had made up their mind by that point. So do you feel the pressure to make this decision more quickly this time?
I would certainly suggest that we do. I mean, let's be honest. There's no choice here. There never was a choice, and waiting any longer only delays the obvious and the time we need to explain this. I mean, our members need to be. We need to educate our members as to why this is so critical to them. Social Security is one of the issues we discussed. Joe Biden was key in saving the pensions, not just for our union, but many other unions that were troubled pensions. He has been very, very positive and proactive in reforming the Labor Board, the Department of Labor, OSHA, all these different agencies that really, really affect the livelihoods and well-being of our members and those folks that aren't members, working men and women.
I know that the president of your union has met with Trump more than once. We've got images of them together at Mar-a-Lago, so he has taken the time to do that. I know you have chosen not to do that, as you just mentioned yourself. Is that what your rank and file want? That they wanted to make sure that he did meet with Trump as well? Do you think that was important?
I think they argued that was the reason they did it. I would just say that, the old story about a snake nursing it to health and then it bites you. You knew it was a snake when you handled it. So Donald Trump is what he is. He's been anti-union for decades, and I think we're wasting our time. So I may be, I'm probably obviously the one that didn't attend, that takes a very different opinion of dealing with people that aren't going to help you.
And to that point, I want to ask you, an NBC News poll came out. It showed Biden does have a 9-point lead among union households over Trump. But that was down from a 16-point lead 4 years ago. So cut nearly in half. Obviously still a lead, but down dramatically. And that may be part of the reason why you feel the need, as you say, to educate union members and to move more quickly here. But what do you think accounts for that drop?
I think some of it is us not communicating with our membership enough and letting them understand. Lots of folks have boats and cars and huge pickups and beautiful homes, and I think the better we do in negotiating contracts, we tend to see a movement towards republicanism, if you want to call it that. And we need to understand that these gains were won primarily by Democrats that are willing to vote for us. I know we get accused of supporting only Democrats, but honestly, the reason is that Republicans haven't supported us. I mean, they're pushing right to work. Right to work doesn't benefit anybody. It benefits corporations.
All right. Well, John, I appreciate your time. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Up front next, what do an NFL star and a former wrestler have in common? We'll tell you tonight. And we are going to get back to John King at the Magic Wall to see exactly what a third-party ticket might mean and what we're looking for in these next hours as polls continue to close. And tempers are flaring tonight as Robert Hur defends mentioning Biden's age and memory in his final report regarding the president's handling of classified documents.
Did you find that the president was senile?
I did not. That conclusion does not appear in my report, Congressman.
Welcome back to our special America's Choice edition of Out Front. Just moments ago, President Biden officially clinching the Democratic nomination for president thanks to the state of Georgia. Donald Trump will have his nomination locked up by the end of the night. He has also won the state of Georgia, and it is now all about the general election ground game. So Donald Trump going to Ohio this week, Biden going to Michigan and Wisconsin. Jeff Zeleny is out front tonight in the key battleground state of Wisconsin. And Jeff, when you look at the calendar, you look at where Biden's going, you look where Trump is going, tells you everything you need to know.
Aaron, it does. It tells us about part of the story, actually. I mean, President Biden will be coming here to Wisconsin tomorrow. There is no state that makes up a more crucial part of that blue wall that President Biden carried in 2020 than here in Wisconsin. Think about these numbers. In 2016, Donald Trump won this state by 23,000 votes. 4 years later, Joe Biden carried the state by about 21,000 votes. So this state, of course, so critical, as goes Wisconsin, of course, Michigan and Pennsylvania. So President Biden coming here to Wisconsin to continue to make his case. He'll be selling his infrastructure law. Of course, this is one of his big achievements from his first term. He'll be specifically calling out what it's done and what he intends it to do. Donald Trump, for his part, is actually going to Ohio on Saturday to campaign for one of his supporters who's running for the Republican Senate seat there. So actually what's pretty extraordinary when you look at the campaign schedules of both of these rivals now as we head toward a rematch is that Donald Trump is effectively off the campaign trail this week, at least the presidential campaign trail. Of course, he's been out there tweeting with his own messages, but it's been striking. From here, President Biden goes on to Michigan. Again, that key sort of sector of this part of the country, the blue wall, is important. Aaron, in just a few moments ago, we got the first words, the first statements from President Biden about clinching the nomination. Of course, he's taking credit for his agenda. He's urging his supporters to rally around him. But take a listen to this sentence. He said, amid this progress, talking about his economic progress, we face a sobering reality. Freedom and democracy are at risk here at home in a way they've not been since the Civil War. So those are the stakes of the election here. President Biden framing it that way. His first order of business is trying to shore up Democrats who have still been unsure of his candidacy. He begins that work tomorrow, right here in Milwaukee.
All right, Jeff Zeleny, thank you very much. And those Civil War comments obviously carry significant weight in any context, but also keep in mind he was well aware that he would win the nomination. Those words were carefully thought, planned, vetted, went through a lot of people, and those are the words that they have chosen. John King is back with us at the Magic Wall. And John, as we get more results in from Georgia, so we know the winner, but now we're learning the breakup, all the crucial parts that tell us so much for the future. And I know that you are seeing some really interesting things right now on the Republican side.
Right, and so what Jeff Zeleny just said is instructive. President Biden knows right now he's struggling in Wisconsin, struggling in Michigan. That's where he's going. That's where he's going, to try to get people, hey, look what I've done, and let's look what we're going to do going forward, right? You address your weaknesses. At this point in the campaign, you're the nominee. You have 8 months to November. You address your weaknesses, and you try to build on your strengths. So if you're Donald Trump, you're winning the primary in Georgia tonight. You look at that. It's easy in Trump campaign headquarters to say, wow, we're getting 83% of the vote right now. We're good. Nothing to worry about, right? But she dropped out, number one, and she's getting 15%, former governor, former ambassador Nikki Haley. So the question is where, Aaron, right? We went through this in the earlier primaries. I just want to show you. This is Charleston, South Carolina, right? Remember, this is where Nikki Haley did well. This is her home state, South Carolina. Where she did well was along the coast. Her best performance right now in Georgia is in Chatham County, along the coast just south, right? If you're from the Northeast and you're going to the Southeast, you have a debate. Do I go to Savannah or do I go to Charleston, right? They're both amazing places to go. And the same kind of voters, same kind of people. She's getting 35% in this county. This county voted Democratic in the last election in 2020. It's likely to vote Democratic. Savannah has an African-American base, but the suburbs have trended Democratic, which is what helped Joe Biden win this county by 19 points. So if you're the Trump campaign, you have to look at that and say, what's our problem in the suburbs? Let's come over here as well. Come over here, Muskogee County. Again, it's Columbus, Georgia, and the suburbs around it. This is a huge Democratic county. So you say, so what? But Nikki Haley's getting close to 20% of the vote. If you're in the Trump campaign, Joe Biden's probably going to win this in November, but you want the margin. In the place the other guy's winning, you want to shrink the margins. That's how you win close elections in states that are decided by 10, 20, 25,000 votes. Not much in from Atlanta yet, but let's just go up here. Clayton County, again. Trump's getting 80. Easy to say. That's great. A candidate who dropped out is getting 16%. This is part of the suburban loop around Atlanta, Clayton County. This is where, when we were counting from Tuesday on into Saturday in the last presidential election, because of the COVID voting, this is where the votes came in and turned the state, one of the places that turned it in favor of President Biden. So again, this is going to be Democrat, overwhelmingly Democratic. This is the Atlanta airport. Huge black base in this county. But again, suburban voters who can vote Republican. You see them voting there in the primary tonight. So if you're Donald Trump, this is great, except you still have weaknesses in the suburbs.
Except, and I mean, when you look at that Chatham County, and I understand all the context of the proximity to Charleston, Savannah, Charleston, understand, but 35% for someone who has dropped out.
Right, that is, as your panel was talking about, that's a protest. That is a no thank you. That's what we know Donald Trump's going to win, but no thank you.
so much more politely than some of those voters may be putting it, but that would be the bottom line. All right, but here's the other thing. In the context of all of this, when you talk about shrinking the margin where you're going to lose and running it up where you think you can win, okay, I understand that. Then you enter into this, though, a state that's going to likely be razor thin, as well as others of these battlegrounds, and third-party candidates. RFK Jr. consistently nationally polling at 20%. Jill Stein could be on the ballot in nearly 24 states. We'll see. You've got RFK Jr., by the way, coming out with his VP picks. Aaron Rodgers on the New York Jets, or Minnesota Governor Jesse Ventura. Those are who he's putting out as his possibilities. Well, what do you see in this?
Do you want an Aaron Rodgers better chance to win with RFK Jr. than with the Jets conversation? No, we'll save that for another day, maybe. Sorry, that's the Patriots fan in me coming out. My Patriots are pretty terrible right now, too, so everybody watching knows that. Look, we're making a joke about this, and there's a long way to go. We'll see who Mr. Kennedy picks, and we'll see how many state ballots he gets on. It's the latter part. Which states does he get on the ballot that matters? Where was Jeff Zeleny right now? Jeff Zeleny was in Wisconsin, right? When you talked to him a moment ago, Donald Trump won by 22,000 votes, as he said, in 2016. Gary Johnson, libertarian. Most natural libertarians are more Republican-leaning, but he got 106,000 votes. Jill Stein got 31,000 votes as the Green Party candidate there. Hillary Clinton remembers that. Trust me. Come over to Michigan in 2016. Jill Stein gets 51,000 votes, right? If you look at the margin in the state, it's 10,000 votes right there. Third-party candidates matter. So the question, Aaron, is where do they get on the ballot, right? So if you look at the Green Party has ballot access because it's been around a long time in 20 states, and it could get higher, including Michigan, Wisconsin, and Arizona. The Kennedy campaign says it's going to get on the ballot in those battlegrounds as well. That's what we need to watch. It says it has the signatures. We have to wait for the certification. But the third-party candidates, how many? In which battleground states do they get on the ballot? That'll be a conversation we're having a lot in October.
I mean, absolutely incredible to imagine. Thank you so much, John King, and we'll be checking back in as these numbers continue to come in. We also today had the drama on Capitol Hill, a bipartisan attack. Both parties taking on Robert Hur, the special counsel, accusing him of playing politics after he decided not to charge Biden with a crime for mishandling classified documents. The congressman who was in the room with Hur is next. And we are back with the breaking news. President Joe Biden officially clinching the 2024 Democratic nomination for president. The state of Georgia is what put him over the delegate threshold. It comes after a tense hearing on Capitol Hill today with testimony from the special counsel who investigated Biden over his handling of classified documents. Robert Hur shooting down attempts by lawmakers of both parties to score political points.
This lengthy, expensive, and independent investigation resulted in a complete exoneration of President Joe Biden.
Exoneration? That is not a word that
I'm going to continue with my questions. I'm going to continue with my questions. I know that the term
I ultimately reached
I know
relates
that
to whether
the term
sufficient evidence existed such that the likely
you didn't-
outcome
you
would
exonerated
be a
him.
conviction.
I know
did
that
not
the term
exonerate him.
willful
That word does not appear in
retention
the
has a
report,
Mr. Hur, it's my time.
Webster's dictionary defines senile as exhibiting a decline of cognitive ability, such as memory associated with old age. Mr. Hur, based on your report, did you find that the president was senile?
I did not. That conclusion does not appear in my report, Congressman.
None of them got what they wanted. Manu Raju is out front live on Capitol Hill. And Manu, Robert Hur did not make any friends today. It didn't seem like he wanted to. What are you hearing?
Yeah, I mean, Republicans and Democrats both believe they got essentially what they wanted out of this hearing. Democrats came out of there believing they made clear that this is a much different situation that befell Donald Trump and the charges that he faced, and pointing out time and time again that Joe Biden cooperated with investigators here and that Donald Trump did not, and that he obstructed the investigation. Republicans, on the other hand, tried to make the case over and over again that Joe Biden, in their view, should have been charged, that he willfully withheld this information, and that the only reason why that he wasn't was because of the portrait that he painted as someone who is a sympathetic elderly gentleman, someone who does not have the best memory and the like, something that was, of course, revealed in that report. Now, in the aftermath of this is Democrats I talked to tonight, including the Democratic leader of the House, Hakeem Jeffries, says that this is a non-event. They are ready to move on from this and focus instead on the campaign trail. In the contrast with Donald Trump, Republicans, though, do not plan to let this go, Aaron. In fact, they plan to go after the audio recordings from the witness interviews that Robert Hur conducted over the course of the last several months, including with the president. So that will be a big pressure point and a fight that will take shape in the weeks ahead.
Manu, thank you very much. And now let's go to one of the Democrats in the room today, Congressman Eric Swalwell, also a former prosecutor. And of course, you just heard Congresswoman Jayapal's exchange from Robert Hur. You were in the room, so you could hear them over talking each other there live and in person. But Hur made it clear he did not exonerate President Biden. And this happened on live TV. The words can replay and replay. How disappointed are you that you didn't get an absolute on this issue?
Well, the American people benefited from hearing Robert Hur say that he did not charge Joe Biden. That was the most important clarification. And this is an unusual case where you have two individuals who both had classified materials at their home, and they handled it in a completely different manner. You know, it was a test of character, essentially. Joe Biden says, I don't know how these got here. It must have happened during a move. And he opened up his home and offices for a search. He sat down for 2 days for 5 hours with the special counsel to answer questions. Donald Trump did the opposite. He directed people to lie, to conceal, to move the documents, and still insists that he has a right to possess classified documents. So I think the American people today saw a sharp contrast in character.
All right. So when the special counsel's report first came out, President Biden said Robert Hur was the one who raised the question of when Beau Biden died. Subsequently, President Biden said this at a press conference.
How in the hell dare he raise that? Frankly, when I was asked the question, I thought to myself, it wasn't any of their damn business.
The transcript reveals, though, that it was President Biden who actually first raised that question. And he said, in part, I quote from the transcript of the interview, even though I'm at Penn, I hadn't walked away from the idea that I may run for office again. But if I ran again, I'd be running for president. And so what was happening, though, what month did Beau die? Oh, God, May 30th. Two people say 2015, then they jump in. Biden then asks, was it 2015 he had died? An unidentified male in the room says it was May of 2015. And Biden then says to her, it was 2015. Congressman, so Biden knew the month and the day, not immediately the year. Does that, or the fact that Biden was so outraged that Hur raised the issue when it actually turned out that Hur didn't raise the issue, trouble you at all?
Well, what troubles me is that Hur, in the exchange with the president on the first day, tells the president that the president's memory is photographic. He uses the phrase, you have a photographic recall, and then never uses the phrase photographic in his final report. Look, it's not a surprise to me that, you know, President Biden, who's doing this interview the day after the attack in Israel, you know, is not able to recall fully some details. But when you read the transcript, you see that he very clearly was able to recall what was important, and that was that he did not intend to take these documents and cooperated as soon as he was asked about them.
All right, well, Congressman, I appreciate your time very much. Congressman Eric Swalwell.
My pleasure. Thanks, Aaron.
All right, thank you. And everyone's back with me. So Olivia, what do you make? I mean, look, you hear the sound bites. I mean, that was testy from both sides. Like, angry, he wouldn't call him senile. Angry, he wouldn't exonerate. Nobody got what they wanted today, but did people get what they needed?
Well, I think in some ways, I think Robert Hur, actually, I think he did a decent job of explaining how he approached the report, why he said the things that he did. I think that was important, especially as someone who's served in public service. I think, you know, we continue to claim the weaponization of the Department of Justice, and we put people in these really, really difficult situations in political partisan hearings. And so I think from that perspective, if you take the politics out of it, I think he did a decent job of explaining the circumstances, what was and what wasn't. He didn't exonerate Biden. I don't think he did that. I think he was very clear about that. I think what's unfortunate about this situation, though, Aaron, is the fact that we're so focused on the political mudslinging. Really, what we should be talking about is let's not let this happen again. Mike Pence ended up with documents, right? I mean, so let's control these documents and figure out what happens during these transitions.
Which is a fair point, and there's like hundreds of thousands of them floating around.
From a national security perspective, let's have that conversation.
In hyperbole. Right. But Basil, this is now, Biden wants to say this is the general election, this is in the rearview mirror. Yeah. But it's not. Every one of these bites, every one of these things, this is going to continue. This he said on classified documents.
I think the damage that was done when the report actually came out and had that language, quite frankly. Because I think I was on
that a jury might say he's an elderly.
I think I was on your air when it came out and we were talking about it. And my immediate reaction was, why was that even in there? But I can understand how it gets weaponized after the fact. But I side with Hakeem Jeffries on this. It's over. It's done. Even Joe Biden has an ad out now going after his age and actually meeting that issue head on. So I think that there's a lot behind the administration at this point to say, let's turn this page, let's move on. And frankly, I think that we won't need to get back to it again.
The waters are muddy on this now. Obviously, Trump's facing charges, Biden isn't, but that was the net win for the Republicans here, is that muddy waters. Man, I thought Hur was competent, straightforward, and non-theatrical. So I'm not surprised.
An impressive guy.
Yeah, I'm not surprised people on Capitol Hill didn't like him because, that's not what they are. Usually. Not the place for you.
All right. Thanks very much to all. And thanks so much to all of you for joining us. As President Biden has clinched that nomination, Trump has won the state of Georgia, and America's Choice 2024 special coverage continues now with Anderson.
Tonight on 360, one big night, two big stories.
Voters making President Biden the presumptive Democratic nominee, with Donald Trump just hours away from the Republican nod, meaning that by the end of tonight, the 2024 race will be officially set.
Georgia in the last hour, putting the president over the 1,968 delegates he needs. The former president expected to reach the 1,215 he needs with Washington State later tonight.
The other big story tonight, former special counsel Robert Hur telling the House Judiciary Committee why he didn't indict President Biden over his handling of classified documents, and also taking fire from both sides of the aisle for the decisions that he did make.
But first, the election and breaking news. Polls have just closed in Mississippi, and CNN can now make a projection. CNN projects that former President Trump will win the state, putting him that much closer to 1,215 delegates he needs to secure the nomination. We can also project that President Biden will be the winner on the Democratic side. Neither outcome, obviously, a surprise, but significant in terms of the delegate count. So I want to go to CNN's political director, David Chalian, who is tracking all of this. So where do things stand right now for the former president, David?
Yeah, Anderson, 40 delegates at stake in Mississippi tonight. Donald Trump wins all of them because the rules are that if you get over 50% of the vote in the state, it is winner take all. He's going to get over 50% of the vote as the last man standing with no real opposition in this campaign. So add those 40 delegates to where he is. And so this is where Donald Trump finds himself now. You noted 1,215, upper right-hand corner there. He needs to secure the Republican nomination. He's now at 1,184 delegates. That puts him 31 delegates away from securing the Republican Party nomination. That will likely happen when Washington State's votes come in later this evening in the 11 o'clock Eastern hour. Obviously, as you noted, Anderson, this is not a surprise, and this is not the balloon drop moment. That'll happen in the convention in Milwaukee in the summer when the delegates make it official. But Donald Trump securing the nomination and Joe Biden doing the same, that's a pivot point in this campaign.
And what about President Biden?
Yeah, you said he went over the top in the last hour. Georgia, a major general election battleground state, put him there. He gets 35 more delegates out of Mississippi to his total tonight because he won that state, as you just projected. So look at where Joe Biden is to date. He's now well over the 1,968 needed to win. He's at 2,011 delegates, uncommitted as 20 delegates in this race right now. But Joe Biden has secured his renomination, again, all but the official work at the convention in Chicago for the Democrats this summer when the delegates meet there. But this rematch is set, and we are going to continue day by day for months now watching these two gentlemen go through these general election battleground states making their case to voters.
All right, David Chalian, we'll check in with you shortly.
Sure.
For more on the White House reaction to the president's big night, let's go to CNN's MJ Lee. So how does the Biden campaign responding?
Yeah, Anderson, we've just gotten a statement from President Biden saying that he is honored to officially have clinched the Democratic nomination for president, and echoing some of the language that we saw from the State of the Union address last week. He said the country is currently in the middle of a comeback, but he goes on to say, amid this progress, we face a sobering reality. Freedom and democracy are at risk here at home in a way that they have not been since the Civil War. Donald Trump is running a campaign of resentment, revenge, and retribution that threatens the very idea idea of America. He goes on to say voters now have a choice to make about the future of this country. Are we going to stand up and defend our democracy or let others tear it down? Now, Anderson, the Biden campaign, of course, fully expected that they would cross that threshold tonight. But the fact that it was the state of Georgia that put the president over the top is sort of the cherry on top for this campaign. Remember, the president defeated former President Donald Trump in that state in 2020. That was the first time that a Democratic presidential candidate had won that state in some 28 years. And there's no question that this state, in their minds, is a battleground state going to November. It's a state that they want to win. There's a reason that the president actually went there over the weekend as one of his first stops as a part of his post-State of the Union tour. And zooming out, of course, Anderson, this evening is, of course, symbolically important. It's also just one more moment where the campaign is hoping that voters who have not been tuned in so far will start to tune in and actually realize that the 2024 race is, in fact, going to be between President Biden and Donald Trump.
MJ, so, I mean, obviously some voters were tuned in to the classified documents hearing in front of Congress today. How concerned is the Biden campaign about that controversy dogging the president through the election season?
You know, I think it's fair to say that the White House and the campaign are really in a different place than when the first, the Robert Hur report, I should say, first came out last month. There was so much anger, so much frustration and nervousness about this report and all of the age and memory issues that the report went through. But I think now that the hearing is over, and particularly after that State of the Union address last week that many of his supporters said was so successful, I think we are seeing some of that anxiety dissipating, at least for now. And obviously, despite Robert Hur himself saying that he isn't exonerating the president, we've seen the White House literally saying, case closed. They think the president is innocent, and they are fully ready to move on from this.
MJ Lee, thanks very much. Caitlin?
Anderson, I'm here with John King. Where else at the Magic Wall as we are looking ahead to the general election now that we're having these two presumptive nominees starting officially tonight? I mean, you can see what President Biden's mindset is and where he's going, given the fact that he is literally going to Wisconsin in the next few days.
Right, and so look where he's going, right? He's going to Wisconsin. He's got Michigan on the schedule. He spends a lot of time in Pennsylvania. He's talking tonight about a win in Georgia. Why is that important? Well, this is the map last time. He got 306 electoral votes. But, Caitlin, if you look at where David Chalian and our political team have looked at where are we right now, very early, emphasize very, very, very early, it's in March. We have so many questions we haven't answered about third-party candidates, Trump's running mate. Will there be trials this year? There's so much more, both conventions. We have a long way to go. But right now, look where he's going, right? Battleground. We now call Pennsylvania battleground state. We lean Michigan red for Trump. Wisconsin is a toss-up. Georgia, we lean red for Trump, meaning there's public polling showing if the election were tomorrow, Trump would likely win. So we lean it that way. So the map is not as favorable right now to Joe Biden. In fact, our projection has Trump actually getting to 270. So if you're the president of the United States, what are you doing right now? Playing on your strengths. You've just clinched, you're the presumptive nominee, and addressing your weaknesses by getting out into the battleground states, talking about the issues and to the people you need to talk to. Trump has to do the same thing, even in the results in Georgia tonight. In some areas, Nikki Haley's getting a high vote in the suburbs. So that's what you do. Now that you've clinched, what do you got to fix?
Yeah, and Trump's obviously keeping a close eye on the Senate as well. But the other notable part of this is we're looking at this 2020 rematch coming in 2024. It was all about the margins, and we see what a critical difference that makes. And so I think that raises the question about these third-party candidates because, you know, Joe Biden didn't face any well-funded challengers like President Trump did, former President Trump. But what does that mean when it comes to the margins here?
Let's take a look. Let's start with the Green Party, which is more established. It already has ballot access in 20 states. It could get more as we move on, but it's already guaranteed in 20 states, including Michigan, Wisconsin, and Arizona, right? Battleground states. Maine, always a very close competitive state. The Green Party candidate will be on the ballot. Ask Hillary Clinton about Jill Stein, Michigan, 2016. That's not a pleasant conversation. Right. So that's just the Green Party. Then you switch over. One we're watching very closely is Robert Kennedy Jr. Now, we're waiting for these to be certified, right? He's on the ballot in Utah. He says, the super PAC working with his campaign says they have enough signatures. No reason to doubt them. We just have to watch the states certify this in Arizona, a battleground, Michigan, a battleground, Georgia, a battleground. So again, if you have a Green Party candidate and Robert Kennedy Jr. on the ballot, just like you had Gary Johnson and Jill Stein in 2016, one more possibility we're keeping an eye on, it's been less effective so far, is Cornel West, who right now says he's on the ballot, South Carolina, Utah, Oregon, and Alaska. But again, how many third-party candidates, which states, right? How many ballots, how many states do they get ballot access, and which states? If they are your Michigans, your Wisconsins, your Pennsylvania, your Georgia, your Nevada, your Arizona, then they could make the difference.
So who's the most worried about that, though? Because there's arguments by people on both sides. Neither of them want them in the race. Trump has gone after RFK Jr., but so has the White House. So who's it worse for, I guess?
So let me come back to the national map and just say who knows, right? That, I think, is a great question in the sense that you have an incumbent president. So the Green Party, just go back to 2016, and you come to the presidential election, and you just come in here to Michigan. All right, Trump wins by 10,000 votes. You could say Gary Johnson. Most pure libertarians lean Republican, right? It's less government, get power out of Washington. So maybe that's a Republican vote. Gary Johnson had run before. It's an interesting, but just look at that number. 51,000 votes, right? 51,000 votes. 10,000 is the margin in the state, right? Donald Trump wins by 10,000 in the state. So if you look at the math right now, you're the Kennedy name. You say, oh, Democrats. However, in my travels, you meet a lot of people who voted for Trump in 2016 and some again in 2020 who are attracted to Robert Kennedy. They listen to Joe Rogan, for example, things like that. He's looking at Jesse Ventura and Aaron Rodgers as potential running mates, according to the New York Times tonight. I'll tell you, those aren't Democrats. Those aren't Democrats. So that potentially, that's why you have to go state by state. What state ballots are they on? How competitive are those states? And then shoe leather reporting, polling, other data to find out who they're drawing from.
Yeah, we'll see how the Jets feel about that. John King, Anderson, back to you.
Caitlin, thanks. Got CNN political commentators of all stripes here with me. Van Jones, Karen Finney, Melissa Farrar-Griffin, and David Urban. Van, what's your reaction to President Biden clinching the nomination tonight?
Well, here we go. Here we go. I mean, you know.
It's going to be a long one.
It's one of the longest general elections in history. Usually, you have a little bit longer to get ready. Look, I think a lot of Democrats were nervous, were concerned, were despondent, were fearful. And then we saw Red Bull Biden last week. And it's like, oh, this guy can actually get out there and do some things. And so I think people now want to get out and find a way forward. But I do think that you got a lot of double haters. And it's going to be a contest. Where do the double haters go? People who don't like Biden, people who don't like Trump. Are they going to go third party? Can we get them back on our side? There's going to be a lot of tug of war over a very small number of votes in 5 or 6 states. But I think this week, Biden clinching feels a lot better than what it felt a couple weeks ago.
Just in terms of the length of this, Karen, I mean, and the ugliness with which it, I mean, with so much time, it can just get like punch after punch after punch.
You know, I will never forget when Trump got in 2016, standing at campaign headquarters and thinking, is this the floor or the ceiling? When he was talking about Mexicans being, you know, rapists and murderers. And as we've seen, right?
That was the penthouse. That was the
and
penthouse.
we're still, I mean, so yeah, look, I think both, well, I can't speak for Donald Trump, but I certainly think the Biden campaign is mindful of that. And I think as you saw in the State of the Union speech, very mindful that in addition to the attacks on Trump, they've got to continue to put forward a positive message. And it's interesting, the statement that President Biden put out tonight, that's one of the clips, that's a little bit of a summary from his State of the Union message. It's one of the clips that some of the outside groups have been testing that did very well.
Let's actually, he put out a statement on X, formerly Twitter. Let's take a look.
November, we will vote in record numbers, and we can do it. It's within your power to do it. Are you ready? Are you ready to defend democracy? Are you ready to protect our freedom? Are you ready to win this election?
That's one of the statements you're talking about.
Yeah, when he talks about the future and defending democracy, I mean, again, I think that's the other dynamic we're going to see in this campaign. Joe Biden's going to try to take on Trump, but also talk about the future and try to win over those voters that Van was just talking about, who are in the middle, who are tired of relitigating 2020, and who actually want to know, what are you going to do? So that's going to be part of that effort. A couple of other things, Social Security, Medicare, not surprisingly, that did very well in the testing. When he talked about the sort of economic populism, that did very well. So those are just going to be some of the themes that you will hear because they're resonating with voters of all stripes.
It's interesting, Alyssa, how, you know, Democrats seem a lot more optimistic since the State of the Union address. And that's just been, what, 1 week or so? We have so many weeks to go. Like, the emotional roller coaster that this is going to be is, I'm already exhausted by the idea.
By the way, like, pouring one out for the 6 in 10 Americans, myself included, who didn't want this rematch, here we are. It is going to be a very long 8 months ahead. And yes, Biden got momentum out of the State of the Union. I think he outperformed a lot of folks' expectation. But maintaining that for the next 8 months on the campaign trail, traveling across the country, that's exhausting. I've been there for it. He's going to have to do that to prove he's ready. Now, Donald Trump is in an advantageous position right now. To Chalian's point, he would win if the election were today. But some huge vulnerabilities. The RNC is an absolute disaster. He's behind in the money race. Joe Biden is massively outraising him. And on top of that, you've got this Nikki Haley factor, these voters who just are not sure they're ever going to be able to be with him. Biden's got plenty of vulnerabilities, but Trump does as well.
He's installed his daughter-in-law, though, at the RNC, so that should clear things up.
Who has a huge experience in political fundraising and campaigns.
And,
So.
and building, coordinated campaign efforts,
Listen,
right?
in Laura Trump's defense, she's done an actually good job at this role. She's been doing it for 4 years. The co-chair of the RNC is largely a fundraiser, figurehead position, and I think she'll continue to do a good job. Listen, I think you guys keep whistling past the graveyard over there. That's exactly where the Republican Party wants you, right? You refer to Red Bull, Joe. You better have like a tanker truck full of Red Bull to drive around behind him, because 1.5 hours of reading off a teleprompter does not a campaign make, right? We've all been there. It's hard on an average human being, let alone an 80-year-old human being. Van talks a little bit about like the double haters. Where do they go? That third party. That ad that you just run that Karen said was tested well, right? You heard in there, there's a lot of optimism. We will vote in record numbers. If record numbers don't show up to vote, Joe Biden loses, right? We're going to fight for democracy and freedom. It's hard. 18% of Americans, only 18% said that they benefited from Biden policy. So when you're sitting at home and you can't pay for groceries, democracy is not high on your list.
Let me show you the numbers from Georgia tonight for President Trump, because there's a lot of, 15%. Nikki Haley got 15% in Georgia. What does the former president need to do to...
Yeah, so
do you think a lot of them will just automatically go to the former
listen, so some of those folks will come home, right? They will come home at the end of the day. Some of them won't. Some of them may have never voted for... They may be people that never voted for Trump to begin with, right? They may have been people in the party who just have never voted for him, right?
Let's keep in mind that Donald Trump's going to be running a lot of this campaign from the courtroom. He's got the hush money trial coming up in New York. He will likely at least begin the trial for January 6th. He is going to be strapped, frankly, just for time and ability to be the places that he needs to be. I think he would be wise to have surrogates to go around, but he has not shown an ability to pivot to a general election message. He was on CNBC saying, we're going to cut your Social Security and Medicaid. He's been criticizing and attacking Nikki Haley when he needs her very voters to get across the finish line. I'm not sure he's ready for it.
Well, we'll see. That's why we have elections, right? So it's better than the four of us sitting around. Look, I think Donald Trump, I spent a little time with the former president last week. Incredibly vigorous, right? I did not miss it a beat.
Were his shoulders broad?
Listen, his shoulders are broad. He is ready for this fight. I will tell you. I've been we did 30, 40 rallies in 2016, lots of places. Trump will do that again in 24, and
a lot of diet soda and a lot of Red Bull, apparently. Much more ahead tonight, including former special counsel Robert Hur's Capitol Hill testimony today, the heat he took on his decision not to indict President Biden, his characterization of the president's mental sharpness and other choices he made. We'll talk to Congressman Jamie Raskin, who took part in the hearing ahead. And later tonight, Georgia, which we were just talking about, and what the judge himself is saying about how soon he might rule on whether Fani Willis, the district attorney in Fulton County, could be removed from the Trump election case that she brought. We'll be right back. As we said at the top of the broadcast, a decisive night in the 2024 primary and accounts a big day on Capitol Hill. One would certainly saw its share of presidential politics playing out as former special counsel Robert Hur testified before the House Judiciary Committee. Now, he was there to explain his decision not to seek indictments against President Biden for retaining classified documents after his time as vice president. He came under fire from Republicans for that and from Democrats for the way he explained his decision, especially his characterization of President Biden as a, quote, well-meaning elderly man with a poor memory. Though the former special counsel told the committee that, quote, partisan politics had no place whatsoever in my work, he was certainly surrounded by it today, with members on both sides using their questions at times to score certain points. Committee Chairman Jim Jordan used his time, for example, to suggest the president was in it for the money.
Page 231, you said this. President Biden had strong motivations. That's a key word. We're getting to motive now. President Biden had strong motivations to ignore the proper procedures for safeguarding the classified information in his notebooks. Why did he have strong motivations? Because, next word, because he decided months before leaving office to write a book. To write a book, that was his motive. He knew the rules, he broke them because he was writing a book. And you further say, and he began meeting with the ghostwriter while he was still vice president. There's the motive. Mr. Hur, how much did President Biden get paid for his book?
Off the top of my head, I'm not sure if that information appears in the report.
Sure does. There's a dollar amount in there. You remember?
I don't. It may be $8 million if
$8
that's accurate.
million. Joe Biden had 8 million reasons to break the rules.
Committee Democrats, meantime, used their time to throw the spotlight on Donald Trump, who, by contrast to President Biden, has been indicted multiple times in multiple venues on 91 felony counts.
Did you find that President Biden directed his lawyer to lie to the FBI?
We identified no such evidence.
Did you find that President Biden directed his lawyer to destroy classified documents?
No.
Did you find that President Biden directed his personal assistant to move boxes of documents to hide them from the FBI?
No.
Did you find that President Biden directed his personal assistant to delete security camera footage after the FBI asked for that footage?
No.
Did you find that President Biden showed a classified map related to an ongoing military operation to a campaign aide who did not have clearance?
No.
Did you find that President Biden engaged in a conspiracy to obstruct justice?
No.
Did you find that President Biden engaged in a scheme to conceal?
No.
Several Democrats also ran clips of the former president acting in so many words like an elderly man with a poor memory. Some saw their questioning backfire. Democratic Congresswoman Pramila Jayapal, for one, who told her, quote, "You exonerated him," meaning President Biden, to which her replied, "I did not. That word does not appear in the report." Republican Scott Fitzgerald asked her if his report found that President Biden was senile. Her said no. Joining us now, Democratic Congressman Jamie Raskin, ranking member of the House Oversight Committee, who was given special privileges to take part in today's hearing. Congressman, what did you think of Robert Hur and how he acquitted himself today?
Well, I like the fact that he stuck by the conclusions of his report, which were that President Biden should not be charged criminally for anything. And he stuck by the statement that President Biden had cooperated fully and unhesitatingly in the investigation. And then he stuck by his own elaborate contrast between Biden and Trump, because Trump tried to hide evidence, he tried to destroy evidence, he lied about the evidence, and he kept, these classified documents for months before he turned some of them, but not all of them over. And so, he really pointed out this was apples and oranges.
I want to play some of what you had to say this morning at the hearing.
President Biden did not assert executive privilege or claim absolute immunity for presidential crimes. He did not hide boxes of documents under his bed or in a bathtub. He did not fight investigators, nor did he seek to redact a single word of Mr. Hur's report. He consented to the search of numerous locations, including his homes, and he did everything he could to cooperate, not obstruct. Unlike President Biden, Trump did not alert the National Archives or DOJ of the documents, nor did he turn over all the classified materials in his possession. He did not agree to sit down for a voluntary interview with the special counsel. He never consented to a search of his home. On the contrary, Trump suggested that his attorney hide or destroy evidence requested by the FBI.
You're making the argument President Biden was far more cooperative than former President Trump was regarding the classified documents at Mar-a-Lago. One of the things that Congressman Schiff was trying to say to Robert Hur and get him to admit was essentially that Hur's language was overly broad in his descriptions of the president's cognitive state. Do you think Robert Hur went too far in the language that he used?
He wandered pretty far afield from what his real charge is and was. Really, the whole thing could have ended after the very first sentence when he concluded that there were no grounds and no warrant for criminal charges. So I can understand some of my colleagues' frustration with him having added those words, which he must have known would have been politically explosive. But I got to say that those words did not have the same kind of charge at all today in the wake of President Biden's triumphant State of the Union address, where he was on performance for several hours. He gave a brilliant speech. It was a political game changer. And then he engaged in a lot of amusing and effective repartee with all of the rhetorical ninja fighters and hecklers of the Freedom Caucus. And he showed exactly how with it he is. And so I think that really took the edge off of those comments about how he was an older man with a weak memory and all that.
It did seem that Hur was saying today that perhaps a little shade different than you're portraying it, that some jurors might have actually voted to convict President Biden, and that essentially it was he didn't think he could convince a jury that the president had committed these crimes. So it sounded like the argument he was making wasn't necessarily that there wasn't perhaps a reason that somebody might have brought charges, just he didn't think it was possible to convince a jury.
I mean, all of that hypothetical speculation and second guessing of his own decision really does seem to veer outside of the proper boundaries of prosecutorial conduct. And it does seem as if he was bending over backwards to send a political message to his allies in the Republican Party that although there weren't grounds to go forward for criminal prosecution, he was going to throw them a bone or two. And I can understand Congressman Schiff's frustration about that. I shared that somewhat. But again, I think that President Biden just wiped all of that stuff out. He has framed what this election and what this administration is about. It's about defending democracy and freedom. And as I said today, it is a memory test, but it's not a memory test for President Biden. It's a memory test for America. Do we remember fascism? Do we remember Nazism and communism and totalitarianism? Do we know what we're up against in terms of the authoritarian forces that have rallied around Donald Trump, including Viktor Orban, who had a slumber party at Mar-a-Lago over the weekend and came out pronouncing how pleased he was that Donald Trump had said he would not give 1 penny to the people of Ukraine resisting Orban's friend, Vladimir Putin's filthy, imperialist, bloody invasion and war against the people of Ukraine. That's what the election is about. That's our real memory test.
Congressman Raskin, thank you for your time. Kayla?
You bet.
Anderson here with our legal and political team, Carrie Cordero, Andrew McCabe, Paula Reed, Tia Mitchell, Kate Bedingfield, and Doug High. And Carrie, what do you make of what you heard from the congressman there, and also what we heard from Robert Hur today about how the transcript actually lined up with how he described President Biden's mental acuity in his report?
Well, I think the mental acuity piece plays a lot into the political reaction to Special Counsel Hur's report, because that's the piece that President Biden's defenders and his political allies want to push up against, and that's what his political adversaries want to emphasize. But I think what Special Counsel Hur did today is he really effectively defended the findings of his report, which were that there was not a basis to establish beyond a reasonable doubt that President Biden had committed any kind of a crime. And so his report is over 340 pages long. It details, I think in some ways goes into too much detail, things that are extraneous to what his actual finding was. But he did, I think, in a professional way and in a way that well represented the work that he tried to do and that his team tried to do, the fact that they conducted their investigation and there just was nothing to prosecute there.
I mean, Paula Reed, Robert Hur had no friends in that hearing room today, whether it was Republicans or Democrats. And at one point when Pramila Jayapal, the congresswoman, tried to say that his report exonerated Biden, she was kind of moving along, and Robert Hur jumped in to say, I did not exonerate the president here.
It's interesting. You just touched on two of the goals he had walking into that room. The first was, I'm not trying to make anybody happy. And the second was to emphasize the fact that he didn't think that Biden was completely innocent. It was that he did not believe that he could charge this case and prove it beyond a reasonable doubt. So I think the problem going forward, though, is he also made it clear that that determination was based not just on the transcript that we finally got today, but also on the audio recording of that interview. And coming out of the hearing, they clearly didn't get what they wanted out of Rob Hur. Republicans made it clear that they're going to try to get that audio. Now, Hur deferred to the Justice Department and the White House, either one of which I think are going to release it. But I think the White House is going to be asked about this probably every day until the election.
What, Andrew McCabe, you've worked there. Do you think that they'll release this?
I think they'll do everything humanly possible to avoid it. We'll see how much that pressure is brought to bear on them to get that stuff out. I don't think there's probably, they've got the most important testimony in the transcript they received today. So what they hear from other witnesses is, the idea that Congress is now going to parse through the results of 174 interviews of witnesses in varying capacities, from senior White House staffers to staffers of catering companies who hosted events or who worked events in the Delaware Beach House. What sort of mischief they'll make with a pile of evidence that they clearly don't even understand is really beyond me.
Well, I mean, are Republicans, because they didn't get what they necessarily wanted today, kind of shifting the goalpost by now demanding the audio of these interviews that Robert Hur did?
Welcome to Congress. The goalposts are never
That's
fixed.
never happened.
They always move. And look, this was all very interesting theater here in Washington. And if you go to a committee room, there's sort of two background rooms, sort of like locker rooms. The Democrats have one, Republicans have one. They're called their cloakrooms. It's where they coordinate. I'm going to ask this. What are you going to ask? And they hope that they know what the answer is before they ask the question. This was unique in that both sides were trying to get at the same person, as opposed to one side go after and one side lift up that person. But let's also remember, we're in Washington, D.C. And as we look at the states that we're voting today, whether it's Mississippi, Georgia, wherever else, the people in those states aren't looking at this. They're not focused on it. They don't know who Robert Hur is. And to Congressman Raskin's point, they probably don't think a whole lot about Viktor Orban as well and what his positions are on anything. They're looking at gas prices. They're looking at their utility prices, food prices, all that are going up. They're living their daily lives. They're not focused on the drama in Washington.
Kate Bedingfield, I mean, President Biden as well as anyone at this table. What do you make of how he responded when this report first came out and what you actually read in the transcript today?
Well, the transcript today was vintage Joe Biden. I mean, that is Joe Biden's conversational style.
Sounds.
Yeah, the car sounds, the stories, the details. I mean, to me, it was sort of amusing, actually, that the Republican line of attack on this was that he couldn't remember details, because that transcript was saturated with details. So, I think Republicans really wanted a slam dunk here. They felt, I think, when the special counsel's report first came out, that they had a real opening here. I think the combination of, obviously, as Congressman Raskin mentioned, the combination of the State of the Union and the strong performance that the president gave at the State of the Union, which is, as to Doug's point, more Americans will see than any wrangling in a committee room on the Hill. That combined with, I think, the totality of the transcript, the president making salient points, returning to the point he made, in many cases questioning Robert Hur on pushing back on questions he was asking. I think you have a full picture of a very engaged president. And so I don't think that the Republicans got the home run that they were looking for here.
How did you see it, as you've covered both of these politicians, both of these groups so well?
Yeah, I think that we knew that both Republicans and Democrats wanted to accomplish something by their questioning of special counsel. I think that Representative Liu's line of questioning, particularly where he was asking the statements that Trump has been accused of, and he said, did you find that Biden did these things? And Hur repeatedly said, no, he didn't do these things. And that created that contrast between why former President Trump is facing charges and why President Biden is not. And to me, that was the most compelling, and that will be the sound bites that are most easily digestible to regular people who are seeing the recaps on news.
Yeah, and we also saw that contrast last night when we were speaking with Trump Employee 5 in the classified documents indictment, who is a former Mar-a-Lago employee who was talking about those efforts to keep those documents out of the hands of federal investigators. This is what Brian Butler told me. Did the two of you ever talk about moving boxes or looking back on that?
Yeah, I mean, there was one time towards one of the last times I was with them, and we're talking about, boxes and, well, Biden did the same thing. You can't get, it always got brought up about Biden and other people that did the same thing. And then there was one time he said, we're all dirty. We all move boxes. And
I mean, that was one thing we did not hear from Robert Hur today, or any of the witnesses in his report.
No, and I think that's a remarkable point, right? We've spent so much time today rehashing the language that he used in the report and people opining as to whether he should have made references to the memory and the way that he did those sorts of things. What really stood out to me is this several hundred-page report, 174 witnesses, other than the president himself and his ghostwriter. There's not any testimony in this entire report provided by a single witness who could add evidence that the president did any of this in a willful way that would have put him in the crosshairs of a criminal investigation. 7 million documents. They looked at emails, they looked at text messages, and they haven't pointed to a single one that would indicate a level of intentionality on the president that would have turned this report in a very different direction. So there is clearly a paucity of evidence despite a massive amount of work that went into this over 15 months.
Yeah, certainly a contrast. Still to come here tonight, will Fani Willis, the district attorney in Georgia, be disqualified from that RICO case that she brought against the former president and 18 of his co-defendants? We may know the answer quite soon. New information on the timing of that judge's decision. Plus, President Biden's biographer is going to join us to talk about whether the president that we see in the special counsel's transcript is the same person that he has interviewed countless times, including just 2 months ago. President Biden officially clinching the Democratic nomination after winning his party's primary tonight in the state of Georgia. Donald Trump also projected to win Georgia's Republican primary and clinch his party's nomination soon. We'll keep an eye on that. But meantime, in Georgia, there is a major decision that is looming in the Trump election interference case there. A judge says that he is on track to rule this week on whether or not to disqualify the Fulton County District Attorney, Fani Willis, over allegations of misconduct involving a romantic relationship with the lead prosecutor that she hired in that case. It is an extremely consequential decision for Donald Trump's fate in the state of Georgia. CNN's Nick Valencia is in Atlanta and has been covering this entire saga. And Nick, what are we hearing now from Judge McAfee about when this decision could be coming?
Well, Caitlin, first of all, it came as a shock to many of us following this case closely that McAfee would grant an interview, but he did recently to WSB Radio in Atlanta to talk about his re-election bid and the challenger he faces for that November election. And it was during this 8-minute interview that he spoke about his pending decision on whether or not to remove Fani Willis from prosecuting Donald Trump and his remaining co-defendants. And he said that he is on track to have a decision by the end of this week.
I gave myself a deadline because I knew everyone wanted an answer, and I'll tell you, an order like this takes time to write. There's a lot that I have to go through, and so I'll emphasize this. I've had a rough draft and an outline before I ever heard a rumor that someone wanted to run for this position. So the result is not going to change because of politics. I am calling it as best I can in the law as I understand it.
To say that there's a lot of anticipation for his decision would be a huge, huge understatement. Caitlin?
Yeah, it has so many implications for this. I mean, and for himself, one thing we've talked about is he used to work with District Attorney Fani Willis. There's a lot of overlap here.
That's
Did
right.
he talk at all in this interview, this rare interview, about how this entire decision is impacting him personally?
He did, and he talked about his children. He's got 2 young children, 3 and 5 years old, and they don't see him as this judge presiding over this historic case, rightfully so. They just see him as dad. But he did say that he looks forward to the day when they grow up, and he said that he's looking forward to being able to look them in their eye, and said that he did the best they could, and he played it straight. This is a monumental decision for Judge McAfee. If he does decide to remove Fani Willis, a new prosecution team would take over, and that would likely mean there would be no trial before the November election. Caitlin?
Yeah, Nick Valencia, if he wants to do any other interviews, be sure to let us know.
You got it. Thank you.
Anderson?
Thanks. We want to talk more about our breaking news this evening, the importance of clinching the nomination for President Biden, plus whether the president we see in that special counsel transcript is the same person that those who know him well have seen up close. I'm joined now by someone who's interviewed President Biden many times over the decades, as well as written a remarkable biography about the president, Evan Osnos. His latest book is on the deep division in the U.S. It's titled Wildland, The Making of America's Fury. Evan, it was really interesting to see the transcript of his interviews with the special counsel that were released earlier today versus what was in the initial report by the special counsel. I'm wondering what the difference you saw in the way it was described by her and the actual transcript itself, and was the transcript of his interviews with the special counsel like the man you've interviewed?
Yeah, it was quite remarkable, honestly, to read the transcript and to see, wait a second, this is exactly the person who I saw in the Oval Office a few weeks ago when I interviewed him, meaning, he's sparring with his interviewers. He's telling stories, some of which I've heard from him going years back, others of which are about details of foreign policy, things that he's involved in at the moment. Look, it's really kind of remarkable to compare it to where we were 5 weeks ago. That was a time when Americans were genuinely wondering, is this guy no longer able to remember the date of one of the most significant moments of his life, the death of his son? And what we see in the transcript is this essential nuance, the context for all of those interactions that really makes it much more, frankly, sort of normal and much more lucid, I think.
It's interesting on that question of the date, because in the transcript, which wasn't in the special counsel's report, he remembered the day and the month. He was just sort of speaking out loud, saying, "What year was that?" And in a much more conversational way, as opposed to sort of really stumbling over what year it was.
Yeah, it's a crucial distinction. It's something that I think was not really visible at all in the special report. What you see in the transcript, and your term is right, he was essentially sort of thinking out loud. He's saying, all right, you're asking me about my data handling practices at a certain point in the post-vice presidency. So when did I stop being vice president? All right, well then here's how I handled documents back then. Here are the people who were moving boxes for me. One of the things that comes through here is this is not a guy who was rooting through boxes a whole lot in his years after being vice president. He was working on these other things like his book, cancer research, and things like that.
Oh, I want to play the moment from the hearing today when Congresswoman Madeleine Dean pushed back on that.
Your report on page 208 says that Mr. Biden couldn't come up with the date, the year of his son, Beau Biden's death, when in fact in the transcript it shows that you asked him the month. And do you know what he said, Mr. Hur? He said, "Oh God, May 30th. Would you like to correct the record? His memory was pretty firm on the month and the day.
Congresswoman, I don't believe that's correct with respect to the transcript, but if you could refer me to a specific page, I'd be happy to look.
From the transcription, page 82, the words are President Biden's. What month did Beau die? Oh God, May 30th. A searing memory.
So, just to circle back on this, based on the transcript, Evan, did it seem to you that the president was confused?
No, he knows exactly the date that this happened. What was confusing about it was this question of what time frame were they talking about? That, I think, it gets to the heart of this. Because what Americans, if you step back for a second, Anderson, what Americans really want to understand is, does this man have an understanding of the life he's lived, of the meaningful moments in it, or is he losing grip on the chronology? What anybody sees if they look at that transcript is what people see when they're around him, which is he knows these events. This was a 5-hour interview where they're running around on the calendar between 2009 and 2024. Frankly, I think a lot of people would be tested to stay firm on dates in that kind of window.
Evan Osnos, thanks very much. Perspective now from our panel, plus two former federal prosecutors, Jessica Roth and Ellie Honig. Jessica, now you've heard the special counsel's testimony. You've seen the transcripts. Do you agree with his decision?
Oh, yes. And I thought that the most important takeaways from the testimony today, consistent with his report, was that he found that charges weren't warranted in this case based on the evidence that he uncovered. And he also made clear that President Biden was fully cooperative with his investigation and didn't obstruct it in any way, which really stands in contrast to how former President Trump handled it. And finally, made clear today that there was absolutely no interference in Mr. Hur's ability to conduct his investigation from the Attorney General or the Department of Justice.
Was it him saying that the charges weren't warranted, or that he couldn't prove charges?
Well, if you can't prove the charges, then the charges aren't warranted. They're essentially one and the same. And there were a number of elements of the offense that he didn't have sufficient evidence for. Today, anyone watching got a real lesson in criminal law, in one offense in particular, which is the willful retention of national defense information, which requires showing that a person possessed what counts as national defense information, and that they possessed it knowingly, and they failed to return it, and that they did so willfully, which in this context means that they did so knowing they were doing it contrary to law. And with respect to each element, there were problems as to the different tranches of documents that Mr. Hur looked at, but particularly on the willfulness prong, and he kept coming back to this, he said there just wasn't sufficient evidence to convict beyond a reasonable doubt, for a jury to find beyond a reasonable doubt, that President Biden knew he was acting contrary to law. And there was lots of things in the report that supported that determination that there was insufficient evidence on the willfulness.
Ellie, I want to play this contentious exchange, or part of it, between Congressman Schiff and Mr. Hur. Let's play this.
You could have written your report
with comments about his specific recollection as to documents or a set of documents, but you chose a general pejorative reference to the president. You understood when you made that decision, didn't you, Mr. Hur, that you would ignite a political firestorm with that language, didn't you?
Congressman, politics played no part whatsoever in my investigative steps.
But you
my
understood
decision,
nevertheless,
or the words
didn't you,
that I put in my report.
Mr. Hur, you cannot tell me you're so naive as to think your words would not have created a political firestorm.
Ellie, I'm wondering what you think about that, because what Schiff is saying is, so you could have been very specific in saying he did not remember, the year, he remembered the day and the month, but not the year. Instead, he made a broader statement, as according to Schiff.
I agree with Adam Schiff that the language used by Robert Hur was over the top and arguably unnecessary. I disagree with Adam Schiff's indignation over this, because when you really boil it down, Joe Biden, in a sense, got lucky here by all the focus on Robert Hur's assessment of Joe Biden's mental state, his age. Really, at bottom, it's what one person believes about Joe Biden. But what's been missed in all this, and what Adam Schiff was not indignant about, was that Joe Biden misled the American people. I mean, let's not lose the headline here. Joe Biden, some of those documents, he genuinely, there's no proof he knew he had, but he absolutely knew he had at least some of those documents, the documents related to Afghanistan. He's on tape in 2017. He knew he had them. He did not turn them over. He disclosed at least their contents, if not the actual paper documents, to his biographer because he had a specific agenda. He wanted to be the hero in the historical retelling of the Afghanistan story, and Obama to be the heel in that story. And that has been missed because there's so much focus on the assessment of his memory and his age. That's really damaging. I agree with Jessica when it comes to whether this case should have been charged or not. I think it's important to understand when you're a prosecutor, there's some cases that have to be charged. I think Donald Trump's Mar-a-Lago case had to be charged. Then there's some cases that you can't charge. There's a missing element. You just don't have the proof. But then there's a broad discretionary zone. And I think this one fell in that discretionary zone, and so did Robert Hur, because he said, I do believe a reasonable juror could have convicted. That doesn't mean you have to charge, but it means he could have, and a different prosecutor could have come to a different result. So Biden got lucky in that sense here.
Do you think, Van, do you think there's a lot of any effect on the election?
It may or may not, but as long as we're kind of going back through this stuff, I mean, Eric Swalwell did a good job of pointing out there's some stuff in the transcript that would have actually been good for Biden politically, but it might have been bad for him legally. So, for instance, Swalwell says, he quotes her as saying, "You have photographic memory and recall." Well, that's great for Biden politically. But if he's got photographic memory recall, it's bad for him legally because now you're going to get charged. And so if you look at that, this is a human process. There's a lot of stuff in here. I think the Democrats should do a better job of pulling out some of the stuff in the transcript, not the report. The report makes Biden look like a doddering elderly idiot. But there's stuff in the transcript that makes Biden look great. And that could have a positive impact.
Honestly, I don't think anybody is going to care come this fall. This was not, having been there, a Jim Comey moment number one or a Jim Comey moment number two. Trust me. It also, having been through this, was not a Benghazi hearing moment where Hillary sat there for 11 hours. It was powerful. She was fantastic. Nobody cared when they went to vote in November. I genuinely believe, most of these things, what we know in politics is, the question is, do these things go to what you underlying already believe about a candidate? If you already think that someone is prone to keeping secrets, yeah, you would think that Hillary Clinton and her emails, that there was something shady there. I think with Donald Trump, he's trying to, and the Republicans, muddy the waters. Generally, people think Joe Biden's a decent guy. They may not like his policies. They don't think he's corrupt. They don't think he's, a bad guy that wants to expel, Palestinians from this country or, migrants. At the same time, the problem that Donald Trump has is that this is not the only case. We're going to hear, as we just heard last night, we learned new evidence about the way he treated documents. We're going to hear over the course of this coming months more information about the way that is going to deepen what people already believe about him. That's what Democrats are going to focus on exploiting.
But can I just say, I think this was partisan hackery on both sides of the aisle at its absolute worst. The only person who I think covered himself in some glory was Robert Hur. I'm sorry, Democrats have been saying we need to stand up for our institutions. We need to stand up for our institutions. You cannot just trust the Department of Justice when it indicts Donald Trump. You have to have a level of, you're going to let the process play out. I do not love this White House trying to demean her, putting out testimony against him, trying to criticize him in it. They should just step back and let the process play out, let the congressional investigators ask the questions. But it undermines this sort of argument, especially at a time when Republicans have gone far too far in trying to undermine the Department of Justice. House Republicans want to cut some of the funding to it, which frankly amounts to defunding the police, which is absurd. But I think Democrats are playing a dangerous game to basically do the same thing Republicans are.
It's a political Rorschach test what happened today, right? You're going to see in her testimony what you want to see. I think Ellie points out, a great point that's not being made by Republicans, that they should have made more forcefully. Today they're going down these rabbit holes on how much money he made and all these things. I think what Ellie, thank you, Ellie. The House Democrat.
Well, he's actually practiced law on
they should thank him because that point gets overlooked and it shouldn't be. But it's white noise to most Americans, right? They're just hear. That's all they hear, right? And what it does is when they think about documents and Trump documents, Biden documents, Pence documents, they all did it. There was a mistake. And Karen, to your point about shiny, nice Joe Biden, Ellie's narrative undercuts that, right? Because it now paints him as somebody who knew he had classified documents on the record. And that's what it does. It sullies his reputation.
I don't think in a way that is going to have a meaningful impact in the election, particularly when you have decent percentages of Republican primary voters who made a point to come out and vote and say, I am not voting for Donald Trump.
And there's equally and just as big a number as Democratic voters as we see who are coming out saying, I'm not voting. I'm undecided, undeclared, in these states, not voting for Biden. So
to be continued. Everyone said that we'll have more of our special coverage of this big night. President Biden clinching the Democratic nomination with a victory in Mississippi. Former President Trump just one victory away from doing the same when polls closed in Washington State about 2 hours from now. That plus more of today's testimony by Special Counsel Robert Hur and reaction from someone who worked with Special Counsel Hur at the DOJ, former U.S. Deputy Attorney General Rod Rosenstein. We'll be right back.
Welcome to a decisive primary night edition of The Source. I'm Caitlin Collins here in Washington, along with Anderson Cooper in New York.
And Caitlin, the primary dominates this hour with President Biden clinching the nomination just a short time ago. And the former president expects to do the same just about 2 hours from now when results start coming in from Washington State.
And of course, the other big story, Anderson, here in Washington is the reaction to former special counsel Robert Hur and his testimony before the House Judiciary Committee today, taking fire really from both sides of the aisle, as he explained his decision not to prosecute President Biden over his handling of classified documents while he was out of office.
First, this pivotal primary night. For that, let's go straight to CNN's David Chalian. So where does Donald Trump stand in the delegate count, and when do we expect him to secure the nomination?
He's so close, Anderson. He needs 1,215 delegates. You see there in the upper right-hand corner to win the nomination. Donald Trump is currently at 1,184 delegates. This is after he won delegates in Georgia, in Mississippi already this evening. It puts him 31 delegates away from the nomination. Take a look, if you look at it by percentage, Anderson. Donald Trump has won 92% of the delegates awarded so far in this Republican contest. You see Nikki Haley there has only won 7.1%. It sort of begs the question whether this nomination was winnable for anybody not named Donald Trump all this time. And take a look at what Donald Trump needs in order to win the nomination. He only needs 2.7% of the remaining available delegates, and we're only on the second Tuesday in March. He's going to cross that threshold most likely later tonight when Washington State reports its votes after the 11 p.m. Eastern hour, Anderson.
President Biden crossed the threshold to what he needed earlier tonight. Where does that delegate total stand for him?
Yeah, he's now over that 1,968 needed to win the Democratic nomination. He's currently at 2,011 delegates. He also won a slew of delegates out of Georgia and Mississippi so far this evening, and he's going to keep adding to that total tonight. He overwhelmingly just trounced any nominal competition that he has had in this race. So given all the talk about his potential weaknesses as a general election candidate, it never really materialized inside an actual contested battle for the Democratic nomination, Anderson.
David Chalian, thanks. Caitlin?
Sure.
And joining me now is the national co-chair for the Biden-Harris campaign and the former mayor of New Orleans, Mitch Landrieu. Mitch, it's been about 1,225 days since the last Biden-Trump election. I'm not sure people are looking as forward to the sequel, but now that President Biden is the presumptive Democratic nominee, what is going to be his priority in the coming days?
Well, I think that what you saw today was really a great victory. I mean, this is a nomination that's been clinched this early in 2 decades. The president had a great day today. The Hur report, basically today, case closed, not guilty, time to move on. But don't forget that Donald Trump still has 91 criminal indictments pending against him. So this election, as always, it was going to be, and it's going to be in the future, a choice between 2 very different people and 2 very different futures for America. You got a guy that wakes up, Joe Biden, every day fighting for the people of America, trying to include people, trying to think about the future. Donald Trump's thinking about the past. He's thinking about revenge and retribution. And I think there's going to be a very clear choice for people going forward.
You mentioned that Hur testimony today. I mean, there were points, though, where you looked at the transcript versus what you saw in the report. But then as Congresswoman Pramila Jayapal was questioning him, he interrupted her to say that he had not exonerated President Biden. What did you make of that moment?
Well, first of all, that is legally incorrect. When a prosecutor is trying to gather evidence, they either have the evidence to bring a case or they don't. If you don't have evidence to bring a case, the person is deemed not guilty. That's the way that our law works, and that is essentially what the report said, putting aside whatever special counsel's Hur's opinions are about the president in any other way. And for people that are interested in whether the president's up to the job, I just refer you to the State of the Union that he gave the other night. I mean, the president's ripped up and ready to go and is on the job and making things happen.
The real part of this, though, is that his age is a concern for voters. And so what is the plan for the campaign to address that over the next 8 months for those who are concerned about it, even Democrats?
Well, let me say this. I think that it's clear that you have a 77-year-old and an 81-year-old who are going to be running against each other. So age is not going to be the determining factor, not of their ages, but the age of their ideas is. And Joe Biden is thinking about the future. Donald Trump's thinking about the past. There is a clear distinction between these 2 guys. And I think Donald Trump is going to be on trial with the American people, too, as he is in 6 separate courtrooms in America right now, which is just amazing even to contemplate. But President Biden shows up every day. He's bringing the receipts. I don't need to go over all the successes that he's had. The distinctions between these 2 guys is as wide as the gulf. Just yesterday, President Trump said, unbelievably, that he's going to cut entitlements. Joe Biden said, I'm going to protect him. Donald Trump wants to take away health care. Joe Biden's going to protect him. Donald Trump has eviscerated women's rights in America. Joe Biden is going to protect him. We're going to build an economy from the bottom up and the middle out. Donald Trump's going to do it from the top down. That's never worked before. And so, you know, we're here for the battle. We're ready to go. And the president's on track.
The Washington Post is reporting tonight that RFK Jr. has selected his running mate, and among the New York Times and Washington Post reporting, the names that are out there are Jesse Ventura, Aaron Rodgers, Tony Robbins. Your name wasn't on there, weirdly. But honestly, you know,
thank God. I mean to tell you, what a list.
But can I ask you, what is your plan to deal with RFK Jr.? Because this could come down to the margins. You know how much the margins matter to Joe Biden in 2020.
Listen, every vote counts in these elections, and all of the experts on the panel with you know about that. You can't tell whether he's going to hurt us or hurt Trump more. But that list is just, I don't even know what to say about that. I don't want to dignify it really with a response. Joe Biden's going to get up every day. He's going to try to earn everybody's votes. He's going to bring the receipts of creating 15 million jobs, having the lowest unemployment rate in the last 50 years. Wages have gone up. As you see, inflation continues to go down. And we're going to battle to protect people's rights and freedoms in America. That's what this race is about. And the choice is going to be between Donald Trump and it's going to be between Joe Biden, a future that includes everybody or a future or a past that excludes everybody. And we're just going to have to take the battle to him and win in the battle place of ideas.
I mean, it is a real question, though, of who could it hurt or help more, Donald Trump or Joe Biden? I mean, what is the level of concern inside the campaign about him?
Well, first of all, again, like I said, every vote is of concern. There's really no way to tell. Third-party candidates have not fared very well, but they have had impact on races. I mean, we'll let all the geniuses try to figure out what the heck, is going to matter. But all we know is we've got to go out there and earn everybody's vote, continue to talk to them about the future of the country as President Biden sees it. You have a guy that's playing pity play with dictators. He had Viktor Orban at Mar-a-Lago this week, and now John Kelly, in a book by one of y'all's colleagues, is talking about how much he reveres Hitler. I mean, the choices are pretty clear about what direction we should be going in this country.
Mitch Landrieu, if you come out as that running mate, I'm going to call you. Thanks so much for joining us tonight.
Please, oh my God. Thank you. See ya.
Anderson, back to you.
Again, over on the Republican side, the former president waiting for polls to close in Washington state, which is expected to put him over the top. CNN's Kristen Holmes has been talking to her sources, and Trump World joins us now. So what are you learning about the strategy for this campaign moving forward?
Well, Anderson, look, they've been as though Donald Trump is the nominee now for several weeks. A lot of this is trying to talk about how they're going to build out their strategy and their ground game in those critical battleground states. We're talking about Georgia, Michigan, Arizona, Nevada. But the other part of this is really learning how to navigate with these legal issues. And part of that is the trial that's starting at the end of this month. And I'm talking to sources who say Donald Trump wants to attend every day of that trial, even the days that aren't mandatory. So even at the beginning of the trial, when it's jury selection and it just has to be lawyers, Donald Trump is saying he wants to attend. So they're looking into plans for that and also how he's going to actually compete in a general election and campaign. So right now they are talking about Wednesday and Saturday being the days that they actually have events, because those are the days that they aren't in court. Now, Donald Trump, he has said that he would go to court during the day and then in the evening he would campaign. But I'm talking to these sources, they acknowledge that that could be very difficult. They just don't know how they're going to get him in and out of the city, where it's close enough, what kind of rally or event you would hold. So right now it's just figuring out how to navigate these several weeks of trial in which Donald Trump is going to be in court. And of course, as we have seen in the past, he is expected to use those cameras to his advantage. But remember, in this New York trial, this hush money case, this is not the same court as a civil fraud trial where there are cameras everywhere that he can go out to. We saw him trying to navigate this when he was in court just recently, having to walk all the way out to this pool camera where he essentially was shouting. It's just not quite as easy. So they're trying to work around how they're going to use that courtroom as a campaign stop, but also how to actually work on the campaign, because they know that this is going to be a very close election and a tight rematch with Joe Biden.
Kristen Holmes, thanks so much. Caitlin, back to you.
Anderson, we are back here with the panel and also have David Chalian with us, along with Andrew McCabe, Paula Reed, Tia Mitchell, Kate Bedingfield, and Doug Heye. Doug, I mean, listening to Kristen lay out what this is about to look like for the next 8 months is kind of scary. But if you're a Republican operative, how much scarier is it?
I think it's very scary for Republicans for a few reasons. One, as we're seeing in Georgia, Donald Trump he's winning overwhelmingly, but he's lost 61,000 Georgia Republicans right now. He lost the state by less than 12,000 votes. That has to be very concerning. The other thing I think should concern Republicans is in the state of Colorado, Ken Buck has announced his imminent retirement soon. There are a whole lot of congressional retirements skewing Republican. We're going to have a lot of open seats to defend. Those are hard things to do.
It's also going to hurt that majority that Republicans are already dealing with that was already slim. But Tia, I just wonder, because Brian Kemp today, this is not a surprise. He had told basically everyone that he was going to do this, but he did go and cast his vote for Donald Trump. And I wonder, as someone who is deeply reported on their politics, what you make of that, given, that is something that we could see from other Republicans who say, yeah, I'm not a huge fan of Donald Trump's, but I also really don't like Joe Biden, so I'm going to pick the Republican on this ticket.
Yeah, we've heard that time and time again. Even Nikki Haley has indicated that if Trump is the nominee, she's going to support him. She definitely would not support Biden under any circumstances. So what we hear from a lot of Republicans, even those who are critical of former President Trump, is that when it comes down to a matchup, a rematch, they still think Trump is better for the country than Biden. They think Biden is awful. They think his tenure has been awful. They think that they'd rather deal with another 4 years of Trump than deal with 4 more years of Biden. And we're seeing that kind of writ large. I mean, I think it's also just like a political calculation. The Republicans who stood up to Trump and said, never Trump, no way, not anywhere, kind of are in a political no man's land. So I think in a way that it's understandable that those who still want to be relevant to the party at some point believe they have to fall in line once it's clear that Trump is their nominee.
Yeah, I mean, David Chalian, we're seeing that play out in Georgia right now. I mean, can you just kind of explain what's happening with these numbers? Because Nikki Haley is about 14%. Obviously, she is no longer in this race. But what do you make of what is happening there, given that margin that Doug was talking about?
Yeah, but her name on the ballot still allows this protest vote, this non-Trump vote inside the context of a Republican primary. I mean, one of the great mathematical equations to be done this election season will be, okay, well, how many of those folks just put on their Republican jersey and stay with the Republican nominee, and how many are actually potential Biden voters in the fall? But, you know, largely, I think when you look at these two unpopular nominees that come into focus tonight, the negative partisanship is going to drive so much of this, because politics is always not an either or, but a both and. And so these candidates are going to have to really gin up enthusiasm in their base, and they're going to do that with the negative partisanship that exists in society and playing into the polarization a bit. And then they've got to be able to add to that with some folks in the middle. And in the middle, both of these candidates are suffering.
And to David's point, you know, we've just had a week of Democrats saying Joe Biden is back. He's stronger than ever. There's no question about his age, and that this is a game changer, is what Congressman Raskin said earlier. The game hasn't changed. If you look at the polling, Biden's numbers haven't moved. He had a very good night, but there's been no follow through on that. And that's why this race sort of remains the movable object against the resistible force. And voters are saying, we don't want to see this movie at all.
Okay, and I think that the partisanship, the partisan divide, is also the reason the race is sort of effectively stagnant until it comes into focus. And so both Trump and Biden clinching the nomination tonight, that is a good thing for the Biden campaign. The sooner they can turn people's attention to the contrast. I mean, one of the issues we haven't really talked a lot about tonight is abortion, which we have seen time and again is motivating both Democrats. You know, you talk about this base issue. It is absolutely an issue that is motivating Democratic base voters. The coalition of voters Biden needs to get energized and come out. But we also saw in 2022 and 2023, it's motivating independent voters, suburban voters who are also turned off by, who are also the voters who are most turned off by Donald Trump's rhetoric. So that combination is a really good dynamic for the Biden campaign, and they're going to have to try to drive
that. And a lot of Republicans down ballot who say a lot of crazy things. Mark Robinson in North Carolina, the gubernatorial candidate, Kerry Lake, who we all know, they cause problems up and down the ballot. They cause Trump problems, and they cause their other candidates problems as well.
The one thing, though, that Mitchell and Drew mentioned there that they're counting on as well is Trump's criminal trials. He mentioned multiple of them, but Paula Reed, I mean, as we've been reporting, we're not sure that any of them are going to happen beyond the case that is slated to start in New York later this month, the hush money case, which is seen as, I mean, the DA's office says this is still legally perilous for him, but is not seen as bad potentially as the Jack Smith cases.
Yeah, absolutely. If he had to pick one case to go before the election, this would be the case that he would pick. No one wants to be criminally charged in the middle of a campaign season or ever, but this particular case, the nature of these allegations, people refer to it as the hush money case. The district attorney's office is framing it as the 2016 election interference case, arguing that the hush money that was paid to Stormy Daniels was done so in an effort to influence the election. You know, a lot of folks in Trump world don't believe that is something that is really going to influence voters, even if there is a conviction. But he's going to have to be in a courtroom Monday, Tuesday, Thursday and Friday. There'll be Wednesdays off. Look, we've seen in courtrooms across America, the campaign is very portable. He will likely turn these into campaign stops, even though he won't be able to travel. So logistically, it's complicated. But if he had to pick one trial, this is it. And it is unclear if they can get a conviction here.
It may be Melania Trump's least favorite trial.
I think that's safe to say. Notice we have not seen her out on the campaign trail at all this season. But Andrew McCabe, I think we got a taste of what that could look like if these trials were happening. They would not be on camera, but there would be reporters in court. We would have the quotes. We'd know these witnesses who would be on the witness stand. And one of them, we talked to him last night in the classified documents case. He was previously only known as Trump employee number 5. He's now known as Brian Butler. He worked at Mar-a-Lago for a long time. And we talked about the pressure that he faced to stay inside the Trump fold. This is what he told us.
I mean, I think the American people have the right to know the facts, that this is not a witch hunt. I mean, he can go on and TV and say this. That's one of the reasons for doing this. And quote, you know, the PRA says this and that. It's all bogus. But people believe him.
You think it's a fair investigation?
Absolutely.
How much of a difference do you think it would make if people could hear from the Brian Butlers, the other witnesses, every day leading up to the election?
Well, we're going to find out, because in a number of filings over the last week or so, the special counsel team has turned over to the defense in discovery the names, the identities of witnesses, their actual testimony from the grand jury. So it is, they're fighting right now in court, as we know, to keep that information under seal and not share it with the public. But we'll see how that motion turns out. In either case, we are likely to see more and more witnesses identified, maybe some coming forward voluntarily, like Mr. Butler did yesterday, and that will initiate a process for them personally that will subject them to unbelievable scrutiny from the defense team. Donald Trump's lawyers will go after each and every one of these people to uncover every stone that might have a negative fact underneath it in an effort to prepare for their ability to cross-examine these folks in the trial. And it is going to get very tough for them.
He talked about the moment where he kind of exhaled when the special counsel's team said, by the way, all of your testimony has now been turned over to Trump's lawyers. Andrew McCabe, thank you for that. Everybody stand by. Up next, we are following today's other massive story as the former special counsel Robert Hur in the other classified documents case told the House Judiciary Committee why he neither indicted nor exonerated President Biden over his handling of classified documents. We're going to speak to former Trump Deputy Attorney General Rod Rosenstein for his take on the testimony and the politics surrounding it and how it compares with his own experience handling politically hot legal topics, many of them. Later on tonight, new reporting from CNN's David Culver on what is happening in Haiti. The Prime Minister resigning, a multinational security force put on hold, and armed gangs now in control of the capital. His report ahead here on The Source tonight. Back to our breaking news tonight, as President Biden has now clinched the Democratic Party's nomination with a win in the Georgia primary. This comes after we saw some fireworks on the Hill today as House lawmakers, both Democrats and Republicans, got their first crack at questioning the special counsel who declined to charge President Biden, despite Robert Hur saying that he did determine Biden had willfully retained classified information. Both sides arguing that politics were at play in Hur's report, and one name in particular kept coming up.
And you later joined the Trump Justice Department as the principal associate deputy attorney general, working as the right-hand man for another known Federalist Society member, Rod Rosenstein. Isn't that correct?
I served as Mr. Rosenstein's principal deputy.
Bill Barr didn't name Bob Mueller as a special counsel. Bob Mueller was named by Rod Rosenstein. That's a huge difference in how this whole thing works.
Rod Rosenstein was the Deputy Attorney General in the Trump administration and oversaw the Mueller investigation and his appointment. He happens to be sitting next to me right now. Great to have you here, as you were name dropped several times during that testimony. Obviously, Robert Hur also was your deputy when you were at the Justice Department. With him testifying today, and as you were able to read the transcript of his interview with President Biden, do you think it was reflected fairly in his report?
You know, Caitlin, Rob had a difficult job to do. He had to make a determination about whether criminal charges were warranted, and that required him first to determine what are the facts. And some of the facts were ambiguous. And as is often the case in these sort of investigations, you're not sure what was somebody's intent, what was their state of mind. And so, that's what led Rob to produce such a lengthy report with so many details that reflected his factual findings. And then he had to exercise judgment about whether those facts gave rise to sufficient evidence that would warrant a criminal prosecution.
But do you think that what you saw in the transcript made the report look fair, the way that he had constructed it, knowing it was going to become public?
Caitlin, I've read the whole report, which is 350-some pages. I didn't read all the transcripts, so I can't answer that fully, but I think he fairly summarized what was relevant to the investigation, yes.
You said that you agreed with his decision overall on the report here once it was initially issued, not to bring charges against President Biden. When it comes to the age part specifically, there was this argument from Republicans, from Democrats, pretty overtly, that partisan politics drove his report. What do you make of that, knowing Robert Hur?
Well, that's ridiculous, Caitlin. I mean, what you saw today was a prosecutor up against 40 politicians, and they have different functions. And I think that really played out very dramatically today. Rob Hur's job, like everybody in the Department of Justice, and he's one of the best people and best prosecutors I've worked with in my 30 years in the Department of Justice, both Democrats and Republicans. He plays it straight. Here are the facts. Here's my analysis. And what does it mean in terms of the legal significance? Is the suspect culpable or not of committing a crime? The politicians are interested in the political significance of those findings, but that wasn't an issue for Rob. That wasn't his agenda. That wasn't his goal. And so he produced a report that reflected the relevant legal findings and simply ignored the political context.
Republicans now want the audio of the recordings of those interviews that he did with multiple witnesses, including with President Biden himself. If you were at the DOJ today, would you support releasing that?
I would say yes, Caitlin. I mean, having already produced the transcript, the substance of it is all out there. And so I don't see any reason to withhold the audio recordings, given that the transcript is already public.
One thing that it was strongly contrasted with today was Donald Trump, your former boss's classified documents indictment. Republicans saying that it was unfair that Trump was charged if Biden wasn't. Democrats saying there's a big difference in what happened here. We spoke with one of the witnesses in the Trump case last night. This is what he told me.
On that day, as you're helping load these boxes unwittingly into the plane and handing them to the pilots, Trump is back at Mar-a-Lago. And did you know that his attorneys were there that day?
It's funny because I remember seeing this taller guy, I think flicked back, silver hair. I think it was Evan, who I now know to be Evan Corcoran. And I saw a bunch of other people in the living room. I had no clue. I'm just seeing all these people.
And it was Evan Corcoran, Trump's attorney, and members of the FBI, Jay Bratt.
Which, I come to realize now, at the same time he's going in there, the boxes are going from somewhere into a vehicle, which are eventually going to the plane, which I load with Walt.
How powerful of a witness do you think he'd be if this goes to trial?
Caitlin, I'm not in position to comment on the witnesses in the Trump case. I think, like every case, it's going to depend upon all the witnesses, and not just the prosecution's witnesses, but also the defense witnesses and the theory the defendant lays out. So I don't think you can comment on how you think a case is going to come out just based upon one particular witness.
The last time that you were on CNN, the immunity case had not yet gone to the Supreme Court. It is now before the Supreme Court. They're going to hear arguments on it. Do you believe that presidents should have full immunity from any prosecution while they're in office?
Caitlin, my history, I've worked on investigations of presidents. I worked on the Whitewater investigation. I was responsible for the Russia special counsel investigation. And the issue that those investigations raise is it appropriate, number one, to investigate conduct that involves the president? And then if the evidence were to prove the president committed a crime, could you prosecute the president either while in office or after the president leaves office? Obviously, I believe that those investigations were appropriate, that it was appropriate to conduct that investigation. The question raised in this case, in part, is whether or not the conduct at issue in the indictment was within the scope of the president's official responsibilities. If it was, then there's an argument for immunity. If it wasn't, if it exceeded the legitimate scope of presidential duties, then I think that there's no argument for immunity there.
And do you think that what he's alleged to have done is in the scope of presidential duties?
I don't want to comment, Caitlin, on the issue before the Supreme Court. I think I'll wait and see what they have to say.
So you don't want to say whether or not you believe that he has immunity in that election interference case?
Well, I will say that the D.C. Circuit opinion was a unanimous opinion and was quite an effective summary of the law. The probability is the Supreme Court will uphold that, but it's up to the 5 justices of the Supreme Court.
Yeah, I've got to ask you one more thing. I know you're not overtly political. You stick to the facts and the law, but you did work for Donald Trump in the Justice Department, and there are questions about what that would look like in a second Trump term, and he may very well be the next president. He posted the other day that one of his first actions if he took office, and I'm quoting him now, would be to free the January 6 hostages being wrongfully imprisoned. I don't have to tell you there have been more than 950 convictions, but do you believe that would be appropriate?
So, Caitlin, I worked for President Trump. I also worked for President Obama and for President Bush.
Yeah, you were a U.S. attorney under President Obama.
And my approach, like Rob's, he worked in all 3 administrations as well, was to focus on the facts and the law. I don't think anybody who commits a crime involving assault on a police officer should go free. So that's my opinion about that.
Rod Rosenstein, former Deputy Attorney General, great to have you on here tonight.
Thank you. Glad to be here.
Thanks so much for joining us. Anderson, back to you.
Caitlin, thanks. Back with our legal and political team. Eliam, your reaction to Rosenstein?
So I am similarly impressed with Robert Hur. I don't know Robert Hur. Rod Rosenstein worked closely with him. I never have. But let's think about what Robert Hur just accomplished. He pulled off a year-long investigation of the sitting president. He talked to dozens, over 100 witnesses. He put together a 388-page report, and he just sat there while 44 political members of Congress tried to pick him apart, and they didn't find a single factual error or contradiction in his report. He wasn't flustered at all. He stood by his report. He came across to me, just as an observer, as completely non-political. He wasn't out there to harm Trump or hurt Trump or to harm Biden or to help Biden. And I think he deserves credit for that. It's extraordinarily difficult. Think about the way that Robert Mueller came through his report, right? Not as cleanly as this. Think about the way John Durham came through his report. I think very political. Nowhere near as cleanly as this. So
you don't buy Adam Schiff's argument that the language he used to describe the president's cognitive abilities was unnecessary?
I agree that that particular language was unnecessary, but I absolutely disagree with Adam Schiff when Adam Schiff tried to impute partisan motives on him. Adam Schiff was just making ad hominem attacks on Robert Hur that Robert Hur rejected.
So if it
and
was
I believe Robert Hur.
unnecessary, why do you think he did it that way?
Because prosecutors approach their jobs differently. Sometimes prosecutors write more or less. People could write a 100-page report, a 20-page report. Sometimes they include more or less detail. And looking at that, if I was his supervisor, I would have said, we don't need this level of granularity. This is an unnecessary detail. But I don't take that to mean he's got horrible political motives. I disagree with Adam Schiff on that.
Or Jessica,
I was going to say, I mean, the regulations that govern special counsels require them, as Hur mentioned today, to explain in a report that's submitted to the Attorney General the reasons for their declination decisions or prosecution decisions, here a declination. So he was required to submit a report that explained his decisions. But the regulations don't specify at what level of detail he has to provide his reasons. And he really, in my opinion, should have exercised better discretion and judgment about how he characterized President Biden in the report. And I agree with Ellie. It was not first of all, it wasn't necessary to his determination that no charges were warranted for him to characterize the president as he did. And longstanding DOJ norms provide that you really shouldn't impugn somebody's reputation unnecessarily.
So if he was aware of that and he did it anyway, is that political?
Well, that's certainly the implication that the Democrats in Congress were suggesting. I can't get inside his head. I don't know what his motivations were. I just think it was a serious error of judgment at a minimum.
Isn't that, am I missing something perhaps here? But wasn't that one of the main reasons for the declination was that if he did go to trial, this is how he would be observed by the jurors. Therefore, I am not going to proceed with this prosecution.
So Hur said that, and he said, I had to explain my work, right? I had to show my work.
Yeah.
But when you actually read his report more carefully, I thought it actually wasn't critical to his determination. And so again, it goes to a question of judgment about whether you include everything that you noted. He says it was integral to him. So if he's acting in good faith, that's why he included it. But I think he actually had the discretion to make a judgment about what he included in this report, knowing that it was going to be made public.
And let me just say, if Robert Hur had an agenda and he just wanted to hurt Donald Trump, he could have written this report differently. He could have written this report to say, I believe that a prosecutor could walk out of a grand jury with an indictment of Joe Biden. However, I'm not confident that a jury would unanimously convict him. That would have been way more damaging. He didn't go there, though.
Well, by the way, Donald Trump very well may be president again, and one of his biggest regrets of his previous term was that he did not choose to go after Hillary Clinton over the emails. There is a reality, and this sounds crazy to say, but it's Donald Trump, that he could direct the Department of Justice to reopen this were he to become president again. So I wouldn't even argue that this is completely out of the woods. This is something that he has talked about, how he's going to use the Department of Justice in a second term. Don't think it gets nearly enough attention.
Well, look, I mean, I think that, two things can be true. On the one hand, he could have been more careful, but he's not necessarily corrupt. And I think what Schiff was doing was saying, because you weren't careful, you are therefore corrupt. And I think, I agree with you from earlier, that's dangerous. We do want, especially on the Democratic Party side now, we're going to have to defend all these institutions. We don't want to, I think, cast those kind of aspersions without real evidence. And I didn't see the evidence, I just saw the accusation.
That's well said.
I thought he was saying you're corrupt. I think he was I think the part of the goal of the Democrats was to ascribe political motives and to acknowledge that you are old enough and wise enough to know that when you write a document like this, you do have some discretion and that it will actually face some scrutiny. And people will look at your words and they will draw a judgment from your words. I think he was kind of more holding him accountable for, don't tell me you didn't know what people were going to take from saying he's a kindly old man.
And the fact that the transcripts were released that didn't actually really seem to support the characterization, I thought sort of cast this in a new light, which made it seem even more unnecessary.
It really was interesting that he literally sells Biden a photographic memory in the transcripts, but he doesn't put that in the report. So I think that was better for Biden legally.
Well, listen, there's something in the audio recordings, right? Clearly, that we don't know, because if it was completely exonerating, the Biden administration would have pushed those out this morning, and everyone would be listening to them right now. So there's something in those audio recordings that may go to what Hur, wrote and why he wrote it. There may be pauses, there may be nuances that you can't hear on a cold record, cold transcript that we're not seeing.
Well, you can bet the House Republican Conference is going to call for those audio tapes rather than securing the border and funding Ukraine.
We heard about that several
So
times.
do you think there'll be more hearings with the audio recordings?
I think they're going to continue to ask for it, right? They're going to continue to
Right.
push for it.
And they can use it as a talking point, right? It becomes a talking point that says, where's the audio? Why won't you release the audio? we know that.
But let's be clear, this hearing did not go how I think House Republicans thought it was going to. I think that they thought this was going to be a partisan Republican who was going to side with them and who was going to really go after Biden's mental acuity, and he didn't. He was very nuanced, he was very careful, he didn't overstep, and it wasn't the slam dunk they thought that it was going to be. It wasn't great for Joe Biden either, but that was not what the committee had set out looking for.
By the way, another point on audio recordings that that didn't get really made a lot was that the biographer, right, his audio recordings of his conversation with Joe Biden after the special counsel was appointed, he pressed delete on his audio recordings with Joe Biden, which is a little bit, as prosecutors, I think that's probably in the no-go category.
He provided transcripts of them, even the ones that were deleted, and they were able to get back. But yes,
however, you don't
consider charging him.
Once you get a notice from a prosecutor, there's something going on. You don't go through your emails and start deleting files, right?
For sure.
Everybody knows that.
Emails, David.
Everybody, coming up more on President Biden clinching the nomination, plus our reporting about how the former president plans to incorporate his trials into his campaign. We'll talk to New York Times' Maggie Haberman about that. Also, we'll talk to a group of undecided voters in Georgia. Yes, some people are still undecided. President Biden won that state 4 years ago by less than 12,000 votes. That's ahead. Continuing with our breaking news coverage, former President Trump is expected to clinch the Republican nomination within the next few hours. Just a short time after President Biden clinched his nomination tonight. That comes as our Kristen Holmes reported earlier that the former president is expecting to use his court appearances in the upcoming Stormy Daniels hush money trial as an opportunity to campaign. Joined now by New York Times senior political correspondent Maggie Haberman. It's interesting, this idea of using the court appearances as a way to stay active on the campaign trail. I mean, both just from a practical standpoint, it makes sense, but it's also been effective for him thus far.
It's been what he has done this entire time. He did it through the primary cycle to great effect. Now, I would argue that legally, his performances in court during the E. Jean Carroll trial and during the New York AG trial did not go particularly well for him in terms of the judgments that came down, but they certainly created a lot of noise and a sense of motion as he was in these primaries in the final stages. And this is what that will be, especially because he's going to be in court 4 days a week. Wednesdays will be a break. So the only days that he can really campaign are Saturday and Sunday.
And yet he knows that so many cameras are going to be at the courthouse, and there's not videotape inside the courtroom, so they'll need to occupy their time talking about stuff. So his appearances there will get tremendous pickup.
That's exactly right. And this is something that, we had expected was going to happen and may still happen if there's a federal January 6th related trial where there won't be cameras in the courtroom. There, as you say, won't be cameras in the courtroom for the Bragg trial. And so Trump will go out and he'll give his spin and he'll say whatever he's going to say. And he's going to hope that he's going to drown out whatever the witness testimony is and whatever damaging evidence is offered in the case.
Is he trying to, in terms of campaign strategy, to build his base? Is he trying to just pick away some black voters from President Biden, Hispanic voters, whomever he can get?
I don't think that's what he's doing in this upcoming court case. I don't think that's the target. I think the target is essentially survival, to be honest. And I think his aides are hoping that he does not do himself damage because, as we have seen in recent days, he is saying things that are not helping him. It's not like it's always a net plus when he talks. But in general, it is true that part of their math is they are trying to make a play for black voters. He's been very explicit about it. He also has been trafficking in all kinds of racial stereotypes as he does it, but he refers back to his record as president. Even if he doesn't pick up those votes, even if the public polling showing him getting a much higher percentage of black voters is wrong. Part of the strategy is just peeling it away from Biden, either so people stay home or toward an independent candidate.
It is also just bizarre. You think about John Kelly telling Jim Sciutto about the Hitler comments, and Hitler did some good things, according to John Kelly. That's what the former president said. Nobody seemed to care. I mean, in any other time, this would have been just unbelievable.
There's an enormous a couple of things I would say about that. There's been an enormous volume of information about things that Donald Trump said as president, things that he said in his past. We have talked about it here. We've written about it at the New York Times. That piece of information actually first appeared in a book by my colleague Mike Bender. And so some of these things have been around so long that I actually think that the public has gotten almost numb to them. And I think that is, for people who don't like the former president, that is part of their challenge. If you look back at the reporting around the Mueller report, and we wrote about this at the time, there was so much reporting that went into this investigation and what was happening with that investigation that the public sort of heard a lot of it along the way. So by the time the actual report came out, there wasn't a ton new that the public was learning. And that seems to be the case here. I think the public has tuned a lot of it out. They may not in the fall, and I think that's what we're going to
What do you make of the big mass firings at the RNC with Lara Trump?
Unsurprising, and I think it's really mostly under Chris LaCivita, who has come in as, he's a top Trump campaign official, and he's the de facto chief of staff now at the RNC.
Unsurprising because there's bloat there, or?
Unsurprising because they have been telegraphing that this was coming for some time. I think there is not a lot of happiness around some of the celebrating that was going on by some folks on the Trump campaign about it, and it's a strange message to cheer people getting fired, but especially when you are trying to win over more votes. But look, we will see if it makes a difference. We will see if they end up hiring some of these folks back. We will see what the RNC ends up looking like, but it's not surprised to see this mass shakeup.
Maggie Haberman, thanks so much.
Thank you.
Caitlin?
Anderson, Donald Trump and President Biden both winning Georgia and their respective primaries tonight. It's a state that is expected to be at least a critical state again this November. In 2020, Biden defeated Trump there by fewer than 12,000 votes. CNN's Gary Tuchman is in Atlanta tonight with a group of undecided voters who could help swing this election. Gary, how are they feeling about their two choices now that it's in clear view tonight?
Okay, Lynn, what I will tell you is when it comes to presidential elections, it's hard to find undecided voters, but they can be found, and we have found them here in Atlanta, Georgia. This is a very important swing state, Georgia, 6 voters. And since I've met you all and talked to you yesterday and today, has anyone changed their mind? Is anyone ready to vote for Trump or Biden for sure?
No.
Okay, hands are down, so let me start asking you. First, we have here Devani and Kashup, wife and husband. You're not ready to vote for either of these two.
No.
Why don't you like Joe Biden for president?
It's the hardest job in the world. It's the hardest job in the world. And we keep hearing stories about how he's so sharp, he's so on point behind closed doors. But I haven't seen it. I haven't seen it.
And Kashup, why don't you like Donald Trump?
Well, I mean, I just don't think he's a good human being, and just the things that come out of his mouth makes me cringe every time, and not to mention all the indictments against him.
So you're both independents. Might you not vote in the election in November?
Unless they give us a compelling reason to change our minds.
Scott, you're an independent. You told me that you're kind of a libertarian. You're fiscally conservative, but socially you're progressive. Do you like either of these two gentlemen for president?
Could there be two worse options? Right? You know, Biden is weak in all the wrong areas. Trump is a polarizing salesman, not a statesman. We need better.
So might you not vote?
No, there are too many reasons to go and exercise my right to vote, so I will vote.
Who will you vote for?
I don't know right now. Considering going third party, I think...
So who would that be?
I think Kennedy has a lot to offer.
So RFK Jr. Okay, Let me ask you, Deanna. You are a Democrat.
Yes.
But you were telling me that you wanted Nikki Haley.
Yes, I think over Trump, she just seemed like she was for the people versus, Trump, who I feel like is after his own personal vendetta.
And now that she's out, is there any chance you'll vote for either of these two gentlemen?
Currently, no. I'm undecided.
So does that mean you won't vote in the election in November?
I may not.
You may not vote?
I may not.
Okay, Delancey, you're an independent. You also liked Haley. And you told me you voted for Democrats and Republicans in the past. What do you think of these two candidates? The president and the former president.
Well, I'm not a Trump fan, I'll be honest. But I like Biden. I think he's a good guy. I think he's too old right now. I think he's just, his time has passed. And I also think both candidates are so polarizing that it's hard for our country to get behind anyone.
So might you vote for Joe Biden?
If there's not a good third-party candidate, yes.
So you're looking for a third-party candidate. Who might that be?
Well, one person that I don't think wants to do it, but is Governor Kemp, because I see him
Georgia's governor.
Yes, because I see him as someone who stood up to Trump and is still popular and well-liked.
Okay, well, it doesn't look like he's running. So the final person we have here is Lou, and I should tell all our viewers that Lou and I are friends. We went to 8th grade together in high school. When we were in high school, Jimmy Carter was beating Gerald Ford. But I can tell you, we've never talked about politics in all these years. Until the other day when I found out that you were undecided.
Yeah.
Now, you tell me you know you're not going to vote for Biden. You're an independent.
Correct.
But you don't like Trump very much either, and you like Nikki Haley also. So what are you going to do?
I do. I really like Nikki Haley, and I'm so sorry she dropped out of the race. I thought she was sharp. I thought she really had all the elements of what I look for in a president. But
might you vote for Trump?
Probably will. Yeah.
What about third party?
If there was a great candidate that came in, yeah. But at this point, I don't know if that's going to happen. And yeah, I would probably vote for him because I think he can execute on the things that are important to me.
I want to ask you all, if this makes you sad, as a patriot of this country, you all love your country. That's one of the reasons I wanted to talk to all of you. I asked you all how much you love this country, and you all love it. Does it make you sad that you're not really digging these Republican and Democratic candidates for president?
Absolutely. Yeah, I know when we spoke, I was saying that since I've become of age to vote, this is the first time that I really don't know. This is the first time I feel motivated to just stay home.
Well, what I want to tell you is your vote is going to be sought because you're from Georgia. It'll be sought big time. Thank you all for joining us. Caitlin, back to you.
Gary Tuchman, I love to hear those conversations you have with voters. Thank you for bringing that to us. Just ahead here tonight, we'll step away from the elections here for a moment, focus on the political and civil turmoil that is happening in Haiti. What is going to happen now that the Prime Minister has announced he'll step down? Our David Culver has the latest right after this.
I want to spend a few minutes now on the breaking news out of Haiti after its prime minister announced he would step down in favor of transitional government. One of the gang leaders responsible for the unprecedented levels of violence ravaging the country now says that they will not accept a new transitional government. David Culver joins us now from just across the border in the Dominican Republic. So what do we know about this new government, when it might form, how quickly that may happen?
A lot of eyes here on the timeline of all of this, Anderson, and it's a transitional council, presidential council, as it's been characterized by CARICOM. That's the regional bloc of which the U.S. is a member state. And essentially it's been crafted to, at the end of everything, stabilize the government enough to have presidential elections. But it's going to be made up of 7 different members, and they're going to come from members of different political factions within Haiti. And they're going to appoint in the interim a prime minister and then hopefully get to that place of stability. But you pointed out the reaction already in Haiti. We're hearing one gang leader who's very popular, known as Barbecue, saying that he won't recognize anything that comes from a foreign force. That's echoed by a former coup leader, Leap, who is saying that this is not representative of the Haitian people. And there is frustration that we actually heard more than 2 weeks ago when we were in Haiti and in Port-au-Prince, that folks were saying they felt like they didn't have a voice. They'd come up to us and they'd say to the U.S., to Canada, to France, let us make the decisions here. So it still remains unclear, Anderson, if this is really going to create that stability that is so badly needed on the other side of the border.
People are desperate for stability, given all the violence we've been seeing. What is reaction that you've been monitoring from people in Haiti?
Well, when we were with you a few days ago, and we had heard about some of the folks that we were with a couple of weeks ago, and in recent days, it's been a desperate situation for them. I mean, it's been terrifying for folks who, some of whom have had seen their homes torched by the gangs that are getting more and more control, seizing a lot more territory. Then you've got people who maybe not are in gang territory, but are hunkering down. They're trying to stay safe, and they're fearing that at any moment they'll have to flee from where they currently are. We were even in touch with a police source who tells us they're really frustrated, and they feel like they're the last ones holding the line right now. And they point in particular to the Kenyan police officers who were supposed to be deployed any day now, but now we're hearing that Kenya has put that on hold. Well, why are Kenyan officials positing this, it's because they're looking at this transitional council that is not yet in place. They're seeing that Ariel Henry, the prime minister, is resigning. So they're saying, wait a minute, this is not what we signed up for originally. This is not the agreement that we decided to put our police forces to support. And so they want to see, again, stability before they're comfortable putting their forces into Haiti. And that remains unclear when it's going to happen. Meantime, you've got the Pentagon, Anderson, tonight. They're warning that this could be a possible mass migration situation. And you've got the World Food Program saying, at the end of all of this, we've got to look at the humanitarian aspect, the hunger situation. People are desperate. The supply lines are getting cut off. And you have, as they characterize it, 1 million people now who are one step away from famine. Anderson?
David Culver, thanks very much. Caitlin?
Before we go tonight, we do have a heartbreaking update, as we have now learned that one of the last 6 American hostages thought to still be alive and being held in Gaza was actually killed by Hamas on October 7th, and his body was taken into Gaza. That's according to the Israeli military in an update that they provided today. Itai Hin, a 19-year-old dual U.S.-Israeli citizen, was serving in the IDF on the Gaza border that day. His parents have been working relentlessly to bring him home, to bring awareness for the other hostages and their families ever since. Tonight, they say that their hearts are broken with this update. Here's what they told Jake Tapper just last week.
I actually had a dream 2 nights ago, where I saw the vision of President Biden referring to us and saying, well, your kid Itai, he's on a plane back home. And I still hope that that might be able to happen.
Ruby, his father, was raised in New York, and I should note Itai was the second of 3 sons. He was a former Boy Scout not that long ago, his dad said. He was also a fierce basketball player and fan. His 20th birthday would have been on February 2nd, and our hearts go out to his family and friends tonight. Thank you so much for joining us. CNN's primary coverage continues right now with Laura Coates and Abby Phillip.